This episode is brought to you in part by audiobook narrator Mike Scott. When selecting your next audiobook, choose from some of the great titles narrated by audiobook narrator Mike Scott, like Bloody Autumn, the Shenandoah Valley Campaign of 1864. And if you're an author or publisher interested in having your written works produced as audiobooks, give Mike a shout at MikeScottVoice.com. Mike Scott, the voice of history. And Civil War Trails. It's the world's largest open-air museum, and they offer over 1,300 sites across 6 states. Drive the Gettysburg campaign turn by turn, paddle to Frederick Douglass's birthplace, or hike to remote earthworks and artillery positions. Visit civilwartrails.org to request a brochure and explore their interactive map. Follow Civil War Trails and create some history of your own. Warming up in front of the heater.
Is it a well-formed stool?
No.
No, we're talking about diarrhea.
It's one of
They rarely are well-formed.
It's a loose stool.
You'll get used to it.
Indeed.
You'll get used to it.
All right. Are we ready?
Mm-hmm.
Whatever you want.
All right. I'm going to mark it there.
You're listening to Addressing Gettysburg.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this episode of Addressing Gettysburg. I am your host, Matt. And today we are talking about medical everything in the Civil War. I don't care what it is. Wounds, broken limbs, germs, other thing, venereal disease. We're going to get into it all. And therefore, if you are a parent listening with your child, I understand your desire to further their education. However, I must warn you that we are going to be very frank and open and honest here about medical terminology and the facts of life. So right now, I'm going to get this out of the way. So you might want to turn this off if you're sensitive to kids learning about certain things. So I'll give you a countdown to 3. 3, 2, 1. Kick the kid out of the car. Okay, now you will hear words like penis.
Oh,
right?
my.
I'm sure you're going to hear that. You might hear the word anus.
Oh, Lord.
And all the other accoutrements that go along with such body parts. And perhaps even how those particular areas got into trouble where they needed to see a doctor. So grow up, ladies and gentlemen, if you can't handle this stuff. Okay, so here we go. We're with our guests today. And they are both doctors.
I'm not. I'm a nurse.
They're both in the medical profession.
Yes.
Who was that said that he was a nurse?
Fran Feyock.
Fran Feyock. And then with him is another nurse, or are you actually a doctor?
I'm an orthopedic surgeon.
And you are Rick Schroeder.
Right.
Okay. Rick Schroeder and Fran Feyock. You say Feyock, not Feyock.
Feyock.
And they are our guests today. So welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
This episode has been a long time coming because people have been asking for years, can we do a show about medical? And then eventually I met you guys, and now we have it going. So hopefully...
They picked us to do it, right?
Yeah. Well, there's the only choice we had.
That's the way we felt.
Everybody else told us to shove it. So
It's our niche.
So, all right, let's talk about you guys and your medical background. Rick, we'll start with you. You're retired now, but you were an orthopedic surgeon?
Yes, I was an orthopedic surgeon and practiced for 33 years in Johnstown, Pennsylvania.
Okay.
I'm originally from the Midwest, born in Texas in San Antonio, but grew up in the Midwest. Did all my education, ended up coming to Western Pennsylvania, where I worked at 3 hospitals in Johnstown, including one that was a level 1 trauma center, and that was my area of expertise, was complicated fractures, wounds, not a lot of gunshot wounds, but motorcycle accidents,
Right.
car accidents, along with elective orthopedic surgery. But I retired about a year ago. I've been a guide for 5 years, and I moved out here when I retired.
So you dealt with things that are somewhat, probably very similar to what a surgeon here at Gettysburg might have encountered
in some ways. I mean, we're, in other words, mangled bodies.
Yes. In fact, that's a true medical orthopedic term, is a mangled extremity. And
Is that true?
it is true.
Oh, I thought you were
There's
being
actually
funny.
an index called the Mangled Extremity Severity Score Index, or MESSI. But yeah, they're not gunshot wound mangled, but they're
Right.
motorcycle angled, industrial accident.
I mean, I assume like if a leg is torn off, say, in the middle of the femur by a cannonball, it's probably similar in looking and all that stuff, similar looking to one that was ripped off in some auto accident, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you still
Ripped
have to
off
deal
is
with the
ripped
same
off.
thing, right?
Exactly.
Okay, and then Fran, how about you?
I'm a retired certified registered nurse anesthetist. Anesthesia in the Civil War was not particularly a medical specialty. It's morphed into that. There's anesthesiologists who are medical doctors that do anesthesia, and then there's certified registered nurse anesthetists that do anesthesia. We work as a team. The nurse anesthetist is in the room from beginning to end. The anesthesiologist consults, and if a case gets messy, we'll come in for an extra pair of hands. I grew up in Western Pennsylvania in Johnstown, and I met this guy when he first came to Johnstown, and we would do late night work, and it's not just car accidents. We were the biggest rural trauma center in Pennsylvania. So if you've ever seen anybody with their hand or leg caught in a PTO or a corn picker, that looks pretty good, huh, Rick?
Yeah.
About the same.
Good God.
But we would start through long nights of trying to put people together with multiple surgeons around. And one time, Rick and I started talking about Gettysburg, and then before you know it, we started driving down here to see things and do things. And I became a battlefield guide the same year he did. And the people in the OR, whenever Rick and I would start talking about Gettysburg, they would start like saying, "I'm going to pull my mask down. I'm going to
shoot myself.
I'm going to shoot myself." So we kind of cut it out.
So, did you individually have an interest in Gettysburg, and then you met and you discovered you had a common interest, or that's how it worked?
Correct.
And so you started coming down. Did you become guides at the same time?
We did. I took the written test for the first time in 2012, actually after a health scare that didn't turn into anything but motivated me to take the written test. And I passed it, but then I didn't make it through the oral. And my good friend to my left here encouraged me to take it again. And I said, "Listen, Buzzbait, I'll take it if you take it." And he said, "Oh, no, I don't know enough." And I said, "Look, you do too." And so we kind of laugh about it. I think it's fair to say we worked together, and I kind of dragged Fran through the written test. But Fran's he's a very good speaker, a very good presenter, and he dragged me through the oral exam. So Fran passed in late May.
Yeah.
Yeah, the first time you took the oral exam, and I passed in July. So we've been kind of Fran and Rick and Fran cleaved at the hip for medical stuff since then.
Well, every time I hear one name, I hear the other.
Right.
So
we do independent stuff.
But we also had Chris Army helping us, Steve Mock helping us, and Jim. It takes a village to raise a battlefield guide. It really does.
I think it. Yeah.
And our wives, who literally did probably 30 tours apiece with us, who were brutally honest with us at times.
They pretty much hate Gettysburg. Kidding.
What was the reason? Do you remember the reason you failed the oral the first time?
Yeah, I was nervous as hell, which was very frustrating considering what I did for my day job.
Right.
And I actually, it's a funny story now. When we walked out to start the oral exam, I tried to get in the wrong car. My nerves were just, I was a bundle of nerves.
So that was the cause, but what was the reason they gave you?
Boring, tense, not passionate enough, just kind of clicking off bullet points, I guess to say. And you guys have talked to guides. It's a very, very different experience on the oral exam than it is all that minutia for the written exam. You got to jettison all of that and just work on telling the story.
Yeah. And then I'm sure the oral exam is different than probably any tour you'll ever give.
Actually not. The oral exam is, I think it's a safety exam, and can you tell a story?
No. I mean, as far as how intense it is for you because you're under scrutiny.
Well, you're under scrutiny, but you're moving fast. 25 miles an hour, you don't have all the information to give.
Right.
So it becomes a story. And what I always tell people who want to be guides, I tell them, join your local Toastmasters, because that's where I practiced all my stories. And I would finish and they'd say, dude, we don't know what a regiment is, and we don't know what a Napoleon is. So they cleaned up all of my discussions, and when I finished my oral exam, I got called up right away, and Angie said, I don't know what you did out there, but we're putting you out. And I said, I set you up. And she said, you set me up? I said, what's a good movie? I said, a good movie is you guys are thinking the whole way through my story, and everything I did was to get you to pick its charge. And she just looked at me and said, amazing. So help me, Rick. You're a historian, but in the car, most times you're an entertainer.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you got to remember that.
Yes.
And you throw things out and watch people's eyes and go, okay, they don't want to talk about penises and rectums here.
And the art of storytelling is
It was anus, but yeah.
the art of storytelling is an art unto itself. And,
it is.
And it's an acquired skill, one that I had to learn.
Right.
But I do tell people this, Matt, and I'm serious. It's a lot easier to get board certified as an orthopedic surgeon than it is to be a guide.
And a nurse
A lot of
anesthetist.
people say that. What, Eric? What's up? Hold on. What? Go ahead. It's all right.
All right, yeah, just cut this out. Lift your laptop up. Nope, that's not it.
No, it sounds like it's coming from outside.
Hell,
does.
that is.
Oh, the hum.
I think it's that fan.
Fan, God.
Yeah. I don't know why it would need to be going.
Oh,
well, because it's powered by the sun.
yeah, and I can't turn it off.
No, it's... Yeah, for some reason it's loud today. It's
Really
not
loud.
that loud.
Go out and shake it. That's what I normally
Just
do.
go kick it. No, it's not going to do anything, Eric.
Yeah.
Well, maybe it will.
might.
Go ahead, try it. But you'd have to get on the roof of the other shed and jump over.
You know what? As soon as he opened the door, it stopped.
Shit, I'd have brought something with me.
Yeah.
I known we was going to be jumping from roof to roof.
But I would tell you, Rick's.
Oh wait, hold on. Let me just wait for him because it's going to interrupt us again.
Are you okay, buddy?
Why are those birds so angry?
Suicidal birds. Oh boy, we're under attack.
No, I can still hear it.
Yeah. Don't worry about it.
Forget about it.
That's going to drive me insane. That's exactly what it is.
Yeah. It's like I thought it was like a prop plane flying over.
That's what I thought, or somebody
Yeah.
blowing a blower, but
Yeah. It's usually not that loud. All right, whatever. All right. So go ahead.
So Rick is very correct. It's a double barrel to take that test. And he told me correctly, when you go in to take the written exam, the one I took was 356 fill in the blank questions, lunch, then 16 essay questions you could take 8, and you had to fill them on the front. I've never been hypoglycemic in my life until I got to that 8th question. But Rick says you got to go into that written exam like the garbage can on garbage day when you can't get another thing in it and you're stomping it into your head. And the hardest thing that I found studying for that exam was not going down a wormhole. Study a fact and go, ooh, I want to look up. And you can't do that. It becomes a myriad of just fact. And at one point, I could write the order of battle on the front of a sheet of paper.
Yeah.
And that's how I started my exam. I wrote out the order of battle on the back of one of the instructions. And people were looking at me, what are you doing? I thought this is going to, and I think it did.
Yeah.
It saved me to get through. So,
But of course, on a tour, nobody's interested in the order of battle.
nobody.
No.
Right.
It's the cut.
Right. They're
Right.
interested in Jenny Wade.
Right. You
Or
got
Sally
to get
Dawn.
all the stories in
Right.
there.
Right.
But then every once in a while, you'll get somebody that
Yeah.
really wants.
And that's a lot of fun.
And then you guys also put on your own tours, right? I mean, you've done some tour. Was it last year or the year before?
Foundation. We do foundation programs, leadership tours.
Battlefield walks that have a medical bend. Right.
I did artillery last year because I was tired of medical.
Well, let's get into some medical then. And before we do, ladies and gentlemen, I want to remind you, don't forget, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Make sure you have your notifications turned on. Also, if you use the Apple Podcast app, please leave a 5-star review. And I just found out that Spotify now has 5-star reviews on there. So if you listen on Spotify, which is the second most popular platform that people listen to our show on, please leave a 5-star review there. Or no review, just a 5-star rating. Reviews, liking, sharing, subscribing are the best ways to help us grow our audience. And don't forget also that on Fridays, starting this Friday on YouTube, we do our live show Addressing Gettysburg Today, in which we talk about everything that has to do with what's going on in the town today and not the history stuff, because people want to come and visit and all that stuff. And it's a lot of fun. People like it. Our patrons really seem to like it. I don't know who else listens, but whatever. Okay, so moving into all of this stuff. Now, I'm going to start off with a question of my own. And we're going to jump around here, ladies and gentlemen. There is no cohesive anything.
It's kind of just like a trauma.
Sound like the operating room.
Exactly. And so I figure you guys can handle it.
Yeah.
All right. Every time, we talk about the battle and people like sit there and go, well, why did Lee do this? Or why did Lee not do that? Or Lee, why this, that, and the other thing? For a while we entertain, well, this was going on and that was going on. But then I always just remember, I go, he had diarrhea. And to me, that's the only excuse anybody needs to not perform at their best. Let's talk diarrhea. Lee at first, but then let's talk diarrhea in a general sense, a big pool of diarrhea. So Lee, diarrhea, what's the deal with that?
Well, let me just start with, first of all, the average life expectancy of somebody in this time period is in the mid-40s.
Right.
So you're not going to live forever.
And Lee is how old?
And Lee's in his late 50s.
56.
He's 56, right? So he's like on the end of the bell-shaped curve. So everybody has a fair amount of disease floating around in their bodies. We don't understand bugs, bacteria. They probably had COVID-6 and didn't even know it. Mm-hmm. All right. But they're not well cared for people at this time. Lee is subject to that. Lee has some type of documented cardiac event that we can come up with in March or April, but we keep bugging Wayne Motts to get us the cardiology consult in the echoes, and he says he hasn't been able to find them yet in the archives. So he has some type of cardiac event, and if that happened to you or me or Rick in March, we would be in cardiac rehab coming into June and July. We would be bringing you back slowly. So he's got a cardiac issue going on. And on top of that, he's under tremendous stress and he's drinking unclean water. And what does that do to your gut, Rick?
Well, anytime you're taking in contaminated foodstuffs or water, you run the real risk of getting diarrhea, loose stools. It's the most, in the big picture, the biggest killer in the American Civil War is diarrhea. 2/3 of people died of disease in the Civil War. So only 1/3 of the 750,000 people who died of wounds. 2/3 died of disease, and the leading killer of those diseases was diarrhea, believe it or not.
So, Lee, was it angina, or do we not know?
We don't know, but diarrhea, you have to understand, it's the 1860s. We don't have the capability to rehydrate you with an IV. We can't. All right? Now we get... Rick, I'm blanking on it. What's the diarrhea that we get today that we give vancomycin for?
Pseudomembranous colitis.
Yeah, colitis. Yeah. We can't stop that. So your gut starts spilling fluid, and you can't rehydrate. So why do you get the headache when you're sick with diarrhea? Because you're dehydrated. Why do you not think straight? Because you're dehydrated. Your body uses the bloodstream to carry oxygen and remove waste from you. If you don't have the boxcars, if you don't have the blood to move it around, you're sick. So these soldiers are dehydrating. There's no way to rehydrate them. If this happened to you, I mean, we've done it. You've seen sports teams where they take somebody in at halftime, say, we gave him 2 liters of fluid and throw him back on the field. That doesn't exist.
Right.
And not only that, they're continuing to give him probably contaminated water.
Right. And as far as his cardiac event, Matt, it probably was a heart attack. he had episodes of what sounds like typical angina or crushing pain in his chest.
Oh, it's angina?
Angina or angina,
okay.
however you pronounce
All
it.
right.
That's the great thing about medicine. There's any pronunciation works.
Because they're all weird words.
And we all, and that's so you all don't know what we're talking about.
I noticed that.
But there are also some medical pundits who say he had something called pericarditis, which is fluid collection around the heart. Be that all as it may.
Wait, what's the difference between that and myocarditis?
Myocarditis is an inflammation of the heart muscle. Okay, like viral myocarditis.
Okay.
Pericarditis is a collection of fluid in the sac around the heart.
Your heart sits in a sac.
Yes.
So you can get an infection in the sac, in the fluid between the sac and the heart, or in the heart. Yeah. That's why we make all the big bucks, because we can keep branching up the price.
But Lee had to have been fairly well recovered, because his performance at Chancellorsville certainly doesn't seem to suffer in early May from an event in March. But like Fran said, he's still not fully recovered, and then when he's put in a position to acquire the same sort of problem that his soldiers get every single day, it may affect his decision making.
And he's been in the saddle, and the temperature's getting hot,
and he's old.
He's not sleeping. It all.
I'm telling you. To me, that's it. People want to find these bigger reasons. To me, it's as simple as diarrhea, and he's an old man, and a heart issue. And
well, Fran makes the point when we've talked about this. He only gave 2 orders on July 2nd. And there are accounts, and I forget the exact reference of somebody on the staff talking about a messenger trying to talk to Lee, and Lee rushes out the back of his headquarters on July 2nd because
with his eyes as big as hen's eggs.
Yeah, he's answering nature's call.
Yes. So Rick, there's 2 types of diarrhea. Correct?
Well,
in the Civil War.
I'm a bone doctor, but I hear there are.
Well, Rick's become our diarrhea specialist.
Well, that's what my next question was. There's diarrhea, then there's dysentery. So tell me what's the difference?
Dysentery is a type of diarrhea. Technically, it means there's blood in the stool. There are lots of different types of dysentery. It's bloody diarrhea. This is all kind of unpalatable, but it's what we're talking about.
That's what we're talking about.
And the
children are gone.
There are types of diarrhea that come from viruses. There are types of dysentery that come from bacteria, like food poisoning, salmonella, cholera. And there are types of diarrhea that come from parasites, something called amoebic dysentery. The common final pathway, no pun intended, is watery, runny, loose stools. And what it does to you is the same no matter what the cause is. Dysentery is generally more severe than routine diarrhea.
And what is that caused by?
Usually a bacteria or a parasite, not a virus.
And when we say it's the biggest cause of non-battlefield death, it's the final common pathway of everything they're exposed to.
Yeah.
Smallpox, cowpox, measles, chickenpox, viruses, COVID-6. When those things continue to move on, that final common pathway is usually your gut lets loose. Enoch Deddy, the first soldier buried in the Soldiers' National Cemetery, he had like a carbuncle on his neck or something.
He had scrofula tuberculosis
on his neck.
Infection in his neck.
In July.
Was his medical condition.
Was his medical condition, which he shouldn't have died from, but he gets this diarrhea, and he's going to succumb to that.
So now, hold on.
Yeah.
What was the word you said? Carbuncle?
Yeah, that's a boil.
Yeah,
And
it's a
what's
boil.
So what's the difference between that and a corpuscle?
A corpuscle?
Or corpuscle?
Is a red blood cell.
It's a healthy thing.
Yeah.
You want corpuscles. You don't want carbuncles.
You don't want carbuncles.
Aha.
And you want the corpuscles in your body.
Yeah.
You don't want the...
And the carbuncle you want off your body.
Right, okay, got it, all right.
Actually, Hancock died of a carbuncle
That's right.
Oh, really?
on the back of his neck.
Yeah.
Really? Hancock did?
He was a diabetic and got infected and died from a massive infection from
See, that's
the back of his neck.
another question now that I've always wondered, but I don't want to get off of diarrhea
I
yet.
understand.
Yeah.
So let me make the distinction,
I'll
though.
write it down. Go ahead.
Obviously, we've all had acute diarrhea. We all get the flu. We
It
all
wasn't
get the
too cute when I had it.
I understand.
It's not cute at all.
But why do people die of diarrhea? Well, there's a change that your intestines undergo if you have diarrhea for a long, long time, where basically the intestines stop working. You can't absorb nutrients, and it's very similar to what people with gluten problems have if it's not recognized. it changes into a disease where you can't absorb nutrition, and you basically starve and get emaciated, and that's how you die of diarrhea. You can die from acute diarrhea from fluid loss,
right?
Because there's no good way to replace fluids. Diet and there was no Gatorade, there weren't no IV.
There was no good way back then,
right?
To replace
now,
fluids.
You get IV fluids and antibiotics if
clean water.
We can bypass your guts and do intravenous feeding. Now that kind of brings you to the next thing. How do you treat these people? Well,
wait. Before you get to that, I have one last diarrhea question. Regardless of the cause of it, what is the body doing? Why does it turn to diarrhea? Is it to get bad stuff out?
Your body is doing everything it can to save your life.
Okay.
And Rick and I just talked about that before we started. It's an immune response, but then it comes overwhelmed, can't do it.
Part of it is if the lining of your large and small intestine gets too angry, you'll start to bleed from it, and that's what dysentery is. And if you're bleeding, you're not absorbing fluid, and that's why you become dehydrated. The more fluid's going out than you're absorbing into your system.
Okay.
And dare we say that the medical treatment for this back then was state-of-the-art back then, but we know better now.
Right.
Now, some of the stuff worked. We talk about, people say, there's no women here. The women here probably are responsible for saving many lives here because they boil water, they clean clothes, they give them we call it the brat diet now for kids who get diarrhea, but they give them something like that, mush and meal that absorbs the fluid. But in the final end, the treatment was giving these poor soldiers an opium plug. And there's only one hole where that opium plug would go. Now think about that, though. But you sit there and go, now you've got a dehydrated person, and you're going to give them a narcotic, which is terrible with fluid loss. And when it gets into the rectum, that rectum absorbs that opium, and that's probably what killed Enoch Deddy. He dies from a narcotic overdose from an opium.
And we know nowadays, if you do have dysentery, the wrong thing to do is to stop the diarrhea with a medicine that treats diarrhea, because are you just going to keep all the poisons in you?
I never do that.
Yeah.
Yes.
If you get the trots, just suffer with it. Drink Gatorade and
same thing with the fever. I don't reduce my fever. I let my body do its work. Yeah. And my body is a very horrible worker. So you had just said something about the treatment, the plug, the opium plug. This is not the only thing I believe that I've read about being treated with something shoved up the ass. Why did they think that everything needed to go up the ass?
So
did they not have pills?
They do have pills.
They do.
They do have pills.
Okay.
But that's basically giving it to your gut, right? Think about it. From your mouth to your anus, it's an open source system.
It's talking about the planet.
Yeah, it's not.
There's only two orifices you can use, the one from the bottom and the one from the top.
Right.
There's no real IVs per se as we know them now.
Now, when you say plug, are you talking, is the idea that it's actually corking it, like it's plugging it up?
And letting the medication get in. Now, what's the one if you can't give blue mass?
The mercurial.
If you're bound up, they'll give you mercury, which you're not. Don't drink that.
Should not do.
And
they didn't have mineral oil then or anything?
They had castor oil and things like that, but those were. It was very non-scientific how to regulate your bowels.
Right.
If you had diarrhea, they stopped you up with a narcotic, and if you were constipated, they gave you the blue mass mercurials to give you diarrhea.
If only they knew, they could just go to KFC, and that would cure all constipation.
But you know what? The funny thing is, the opiums and the narcotics worked.
Okay, that was my next question. So they did work.
If you've ever, anybody out there has taken narcotics, you got to be careful.
Yeah.
Because after a couple of days, there's like a brick inside your gut that's got to come out.
Yeah.
So they're doing what we did and what we see, which is the beginning of medicine.
But I dare say, opium was used for almost everything then, and it led to a very significant problem after the Civil War with substance abuse and dependence.
Toothaches, teething kids, muscle cramps, menstrual cramps, headaches, double vision, no vision, blindness, hearing loss, narcotic.
Wow. Let's back up a little bit here while we're still relatively early on in the show. Give us just a foundational idea of what medical knowledge was at that time. Let's start with germs.
Okay.
What did they understand about germs?
Virtually nothing.
Great.
They thought that physicians, medical people thought that a significant cause of disease were what were called miasmas, noxious air. Many people thought it was from breaking down vegetable matter that got into the air and you breathed it. It wasn't until the 1870s that people began to understand what bacteria were. And so nobody understood anything about infection. They knew that clean air was important, but nobody really understood
why.
Why it was happening. And the education of physicians back then was very, very, very different than we know it now. You could go to medical school and you sat in a lecture hall and you heard a series of talks for 6 months. And then you would go apprentice with a doctor, and then you'd come back for the second year of medical school, hear the same set of lectures, and then apprentice again. And then you could go off to one of the big cities like Philadelphia, Charleston, Boston, New York, and become further trained. But medical education was very different, and we've got to remember what doctors were treating. They were delivering, well, not even really delivering babies. People did that on their own, but very few doctors actually ever saw or did an operation. I mean, surgery really was not something that most physicians were exposed to. And as we segue into talking about, obviously, battlefield wounds and care, I think that's really important. But physicians had little to no understanding of the disease process in any fashion like we have now.
And in a sense, after that, they would take a test and be rated. And Rick and I always say, does it really matter if you're an anesthesiologist or a nurse anesthetist or doc got a C or an A in chemistry? Once it happens, you're a doctor. Yeah. So a lot of it is, and I don't know, Rick, I think for anesthesia, it's still on-the-job training. You can't read in a book like make an incision until you put a knife on somebody's skin.
Right.
Yeah. And you think you know a lot. I spent 6 years in my orthopedic residency. I thought I knew a lot. I didn't know jack. And there's no substitute for experience. And I used to tell people when I was teaching them, you got to have plan A, B, and C, and you only know about plan B and C because you screwed up plan A. And so it is, a lot of it is on-the-job training.
But it is a shame. They are getting a sensation about bacteria and diseases. Like Letterman says, stop going to the bathroom anywhere you want around a hospital.
Right.
That's where sinks come out. And what's the rule if you see somebody on a sink?
Oh, yeah. It's if we have a talk that we give, and Fran found a great slide of two gentlemen answering nature's call over the latrine, and it was well established in the American Civil War. You don't shoot your adversary if they're answering nature's call. That's very uncivil in a civil war.
Yeah, not a dignified death.
Not at all.
No,
but they're starting to get it. Women like Dorothea Dix and the nuns that come up here. Dressing changes and things being clean and they're getting it. They do better. The tents at Camp Letterman are sent up to let airflow go through. We have a picture we blow up. We can see outdoor tents for probably men who've got coughing and it's they're all around it. It's like every war. They don't figure it out till after, which is sad.
It's a learning process. Right. Yeah. But the nurses, though, it sounds to me like what you're saying is that the nurses accidentally discovered a lot of things, not knowing exactly why certain things work, but like boiling water.
We have had the honor of doing some foundation tours with groups of nurses. And when you get a group of nurses on this battlefield and you say to them, so tell me, ladies, how's a 19 to 23-year-old when they're sick? And their eyes roll and they go, oh my God, they're babies, they're touchy, they're feely, they make suggestive remarks. And you got to understand, in the Victorian era, the only time a woman would see a naked man is changing her brother's diaper or her husband.
Right.
But think about what's happening here at Gettysburg. Rick will tell you those men are being laid up on their side. These women are touching men, seeing private parts that they shouldn't see, Victorian
Right.
lines. They're being spit on. They're being thrown up on. They're being covered with
Blood on, shit on.
But how do you know it's the Victorian era? Because they don't write
They don't
about
say
it.
anything.
They don't.
Yeah.
So I tell people, if you're a female audience member out there, you have every right to hold your hand up. We just don't write it. Here at Gettysburg, we have heroes that are females, but they just don't write about it because it wouldn't be proper.
Yeah.
And the profession of nursing didn't really exist per se before the American Civil War. There were people like Florence Nightingale, again, addressing sanitation issues at the Crimean War over in Europe, but it was really the American Civil War that created nursing and nursing education as a profession. My wife is a nurse educator, and so we need to acknowledge their input significantly.
Sure.
And like even nowadays, I was at the bedside of my patients for 10 minutes, on making rounds, and who's with them for the other, 9 hours and 15 minutes of their 10-hour shift,
Right.
the nurses.
It's the nurses.
And that's what I am. I'm a registered nurse that went on to specialize in anesthesia.
You're not as pretty as some of the ones I've seen, though.
Well, you know what? It depends what sex you are. Yeah. but we tell people, and Rick and I will tell you, the modern medicine gets its birth out of places like the Civil War.
Yeah.
And it's a team. Honestly, you watch COVID-19, who are they honoring? The nurses and the caregivers. And it's not just nurses, it's surgical techs that help Rick get it done. I had anesthesia techs that kept carts loaded with blood and plasma. It's really a team game.
Well, you say that it's a team, so let's talk about the team in a regiment. I'm guessing this is how it is. You have a surgeon, right? An assistant surgeon.
Well,
second assistant.
So let's
orderly.
Both armies,
what do you got? What do you got?
Both armies are arrayed the same.
Okay.
They both have a chief surgeon.
They have a surgeon general on both sides. For the Union Army, he's actually the third surgeon general in the Civil War, but the name that's most well known is a guy named William Hammond, who is the surgeon general, just like we have a surgeon general now. And on the Confederate side, they had a surgeon general as well, a guy named Samuel Preston Moore. But like every good military system, there's a hierarchy that
order
goes
of battle.
down.
Sure.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
And at Gettysburg, the medical director of the Army of the Potomac is a guy named Jonathan Letterman. Fran used his name earlier, and he's the head physician for George Meade's Army here. There is a comparable physician for Robert E. Lee by the name of Lafayette or Lafette Guild. And so a lot of these guys, like the officers who fought here, a lot of these guys knew each other. They went to medical school together, just like the officers went to West Point, and most advanced medical training was north of the Mason-Dixon line. Richmond, Charleston, and to some degree Savannah did have higher levels of medical education, but even men from the South were getting their higher level of medical education in the North. So these guys all knew each other. At the beginning of the war, Matt, there was a regimental surgeon. The 148th Pennsylvania from Center County, Pennsylvania, would come to war with probably the town doctor from Bellefonte. But quite quickly, within a year and a half, it was clear that wasn't working because they would only want to treat their guys. Their guys would only want to be treated by their regimental doctor. One of the most important things Jonathan Letterman did was take that up from the regimental, skip the brigade level, and go to the division level, where now we have a lot of skill at a higher level, and we can start parsing things out and doing better work. And so every corps had a medical director, and every division had a medical director.
Okay.
And in those divisions, there were 3 surgeons who were designated operators, and they were the guys who could cut.
Okay.
And you were given your position not based on seniority but
Or
on
rank.
Or rank. It was based on ability. And every surgeon who was an operator had 2 assistant surgeons, one to help him. And one of the things, many things that Letterman did was he created a very detailed record-keeping system. How are we going to learn anything if we don't write it down and study it? And so the second assistant surgeon was doing paperwork. Like any good medical system, you got to have a lot of paperwork.
Of course.
But it was very clear that the men who had the skill and talent to do the operations were doing the surgery.
And that paperwork exists today, right,
Oh,
Rick?
sure.
And we use it all the time. You
Sure.
think the OR's is intense. The medical record of the War of Rebellion is a tome.
Yeah, it's
and actually, they did artwork in it that's still pretty anatomically correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's the medical and surgical record of the War of the Rebellion is the medical equivalent to the OR, and it was completed before the ORs, but it's 6 volumes. I don't know that it's as big as the OR, but it is huge, and it's a real treasure trove of finding things out.
That's the next thing I got to hunt down.
Yeah, well, it's broken into disease and surgery, but the artwork is, there's no photographs, but there's
The
beautiful
drawings. I think I've seen.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know if it's from there, but I've seen similar things of what you're talking
Yeah,
about.
if you've seen
where
a
they're really
picture of
detailed.
like a leg blown
They have
apart
like
and
a
the muscle
yellowish
hanging out.
cast on them.
That's what
Yeah. All right, so let's see. Okay, amputation. We hear a lot about amputation. All they ever did, you get a splinter in your finger, cut off your hand. That's what they did back then.
Depending on their insurance.
Right. How about what would the reason be to amputate?
largely because we couldn't do, or they couldn't do in 1863 what we can do in 2021. The options that I had when somebody came in with a mangled extremity, a Dan Sickles type injury, I have a lot of options.
Yeah.
In 1863, didn't have those options. And it was quite clear, and to some degree this exists today, but it was quite clear then that an amputation usually was a life-saving operation, because if you needed it and you didn't get it done, then the infection that would ensue would probably kill the soldier. And there are accounts of stubborn Midwesterners who wouldn't let the surgeon do what was recommended. Now, you have to balance that with a small undercurrent of young, aggressive medical students who are here to learn how to do surgeries. But that wasn't generally the case.
Right.
They just didn't have that many options. Now, not every extremity injury ended up with an amputation. There were judgments made about whether it needed to be amputated or not.
How about like I fall out of a tree and I get a compound fracture in my leg?
In the Civil War?
Yeah.
Okay. And that happens. These are 23-year guys screwing around in camp, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, he's running and he steps in a hole and that happens. He gets an open or compound fracture of his leg. If it's not a gunshot wound, and it's just kind of poked through the skin, the surgeon may clean it up and put it in a cast or a splint, and bones will heal most of the time. Obviously, the trick is to avoid infection if it's a compound injury. You throw in the additional damage from an artillery fragment or a 58 caliber mini ball, and now you got muscle damage. You may have nerve damage and blood vessel damage. That's a whole different type of an injury.
So that whole area is destroyed.
Right.
Whereas with a bone poking through the skin, it might not be as bad. It might, yeah. Now, you said clean it. So they didn't understand germs, but they knew enough to clean the wounds. What would they do to clean the wound back then?
Basically, just clean it with water.
Water.
Lye soap, if they had it.
Yeah.
Soap and water,
Yeah.
okay.
Now, if you were encamped and that happened in a snowball fight, the pressure on the medical staff is different than if you're at the Hummelball House on July 2nd trying to keep your head above water there.
Right. So they could take care of you, in other words, in a snowball fight, whereas you're just in and out real quick at the Hummelball House.
That had to influence decision making, because the sheer volume of work that the medical staff had to do was overwhelming.
I can't imagine. When you say a division has 3 surgeons, you said?
they have 3 operators. They have a lot more surgeons.
Okay.
But every division will have a guy who's doing most of the surgery.
Because today we hear surgeon, we think of someone who performs surgery, but back then a surgeon was not necessarily an operator.
A physician is a doctor, is a surgeon. Those terms are used interchangeably.
And assistant surgeons without as much training would be sent forward to the forward aid stations, dressing stations, bandage stations, all the same thing. This guy's not going to be doing operations in the wheat field.
Right.
But he's making 3 deadly decisions on a soldier.
Yeah.
Your wound's mortal. There's nothing we can do for you. Your wound's minor. I don't care if you're afraid to go back into the wheat field. Or you're surgical. I'm going to send you off for some disfiguring type surgery. So the triage system that developed by Jonathan Letterman is kind of how the surgeons are set up. Now, triage has been in existence back to the Revolutionary War. They would call them slightly injured, grievously injured, and injured, to try to characterize of how we're going to take care of these people. But some of these assistant surgeons are sent forward near the bullets because if one of them gets hit, it's sad.
It's
sad, but
they're probably expendable.
Yeah, they're expendable surgeons.
Yeah.
You call them residents today. No. we had the pleasure of working with several trauma surgeons. And Hughes was his name.
That's right, Mike Hughes.
Several trauma surgeons who were in the Gulf War. And I said to the one, I said, so in the height of it, how many cases would you do a day? Because we were getting ready to do one of our talks. He said, oh, Fran, sometimes 20 or 25. I said, they wouldn't even give you a scalpel in the Civil War. You know, that's how fast they're moving.
Yeah, that's crazy. So, all right, amputation. We see this depicted in movies a lot. It seems almost like the procedure itself has captured the American imagination, I know. Right?
Yeah.
You're talking about, determining earlier whether or not to amputate a limb. And in my head, I wanted the scene from Lonesome Dove. I don't know if you've seen this movie or not, with Robert Duvall and Tommy Lee Jones. And Duvall's character, Augustus, he gets shot in the leg with an arrow. And he's like laying out in the dirt for a couple days. Finally, by the time he gets to a doctor, it's just too infected. He's passed out. He wakes up, his leg is gone. And the doctor says I should probably take the other one off too before the blood poisoning spreads. Now, my question is, A, what is blood poisoning? And B, if I have an infection in my right leg, how is cutting off my left leg going to stop when my right leg is the one that's injured? How is that going to stop this blood poisoning?
Okay.
Now, I know it's a movie I'm going off of. So,
and I would just say that medically that's probably not a completely accurate scenario.
Okay, thank you.
One of the reasons is there's a big difference between getting shot by an arrow and being shot by a bullet in terms of, again, how much associated damage is there beyond just the bone. An arrow probably isn't going to mangle your leg like a piece of shrapnel would. But it is true that with no understanding of infection, that it is going to happen. And any wound that gets infected, and 80% of all surgery in the Civil War got infected. It was expected. And that's where terms like laudable pus, what's laudable about pus? There were doctors became students of pus.
Pus, yeah.
Yeah, and there were certain
so
types
much infection.
4 out of 5 people got infected. If you saw the right kind of pus running out of the wound, you knew your patient wasn't going to die. That's laudable.
You say, congratulations, it's yellow.
Yeah. But if it's that stinky, runny,
green, nasty,
then you may get sepsis or you may get blood poisoning where the infection spills into your bloodstream, circulates through your body, and can affect other portions of your body, but usually where there's a pre-existing wound. Now, sepsis by itself can kill you. It can shut down your kidneys. It can stop your heart.
And sepsis is blood poisoning.
They're the same thing.
So that's what they called sepsis back then.
Right.
Okay.
But blood poisoning or sepsis from an compound or open fracture in your right leg isn't going to cause an infection in your uninjured left leg.
Right.
Unless there's an injury over there, a big bruise or something like
he
that.
just got it. He just got it
Now,
on the one leg.
That's not exactly the same as gangrene.
Okay, that was my next question.
Right.
So what is gangrene?
Gangrene is a localized problem that starts in the extremity, and the infection marches its way up your extremity, and over the course of 2 hours, you can see it go from the middle of your calf.
Oh, that quick.
And the bug that bug doesn't need oxygen to move. It's
Many of them are caused by bacteria. They're all caused by bacteria.
Right.
Which, of course, nobody understood in the Civil War.
Right.
But they understood gangrene, and they knew that, excuse me, you had to get this patient away from the other patients. They would have...
Oh, it could jump from...
Yeah, I could easily carry it from my hand. It could get me.
Because it's bacteria.
If I got an open wound on my hand, there are healthcare people who died of gangrene, from taking care of gangrene.
Rick would not have made the COVID protocols back in the War. Wash your hands.
Yeah, no. And of course, there were no surgical gloves. I mean, they didn't exist either.
Right.
But
these guys got blood and everything all over their hands.
And the care of gangrene, I think one of the misconceptions that I hear on the battlefield is people think that medical care was stagnant during the Civil War. It was just as bad at the end as it was at the beginning.
Oh, no.
Nothing could be further from the truth.
Yeah.
And in fact, there were pretty effective treatments to stop gangrene by the end of the Civil War, using things like bromine and certain things you would paint on the wound.
Now, why would that work?
Because it'll kill the bacteria that are causing this. Yeah. It's not an antibiotic,
right,
but it's an antiseptic.
Like betadine.
Okay.
It will kill the bacteria.
But topically applied.
Yeah,
to the wound itself, and then I'll go in and kill it.
Yes.
And Matt, some of these wounds that you see in the Civil War, just because what was happening, most people think a bullet goes in and there's the wound, but there's zones of wounds.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's like a target. There's the center part that's dead, the outer part that's going to die, and the other part that's not dead. That's where this infection will set up in. They're high weight, low velocity weapons that don't have the energy to get out of you, versus today, they're low weight, high velocity. A small entrance wound in your chest blows your back out.
Yeah.
And it's the mechanisms of what's happening on the battlefield and the weapons that are hitting these guys that are contributing to these infections, because they develop not in the tissue that's dead, the tissue that's around it.
Yeah, and that's a good point, is that when you're hit with a bullet or shrapnel or something, like, it goes in and it keeps on going until it stops, and everywhere it goes, it does damage to something.
That's correct, and if it hits the bone, it's going to tumble, it's going to spin, it's going to deform and mushroom and do yet further damage.
It carries in whatever it goes through.
Your
clothes. So, like,
which are dirty.
In World War II, the Navy, God love Ed Bars, Ed said before you go into battle, they make you take a shower. And they could never figure out why. And clean clothes, that was part of the deal. It's going to carry that material into
Well, that's good thinking. I wonder if that really did much.
I doubt it. We all have bacteria on our skin. And
if you're rolling around in the jungle somewhere for 10 minutes, it's all over.
It's all over.
Yeah. Well, whatever. They tried. So amputation then. So, okay, now we've got the reasons why you would amputate. How do you amputate? Because also in movies, and I'll point to Master and Commander. Now, granted, this is an 8 or 10-year-old boy's arm, so it's not as big and developed as an adult's. But when that little kid gets that big splinter through his forearm, and the doctor has to take it off, it's just like put a stick in his mouth and then. And it's done. 2, really hard saws through. It's done. Didn't even cut the skin. Just uses the saw, goes right through. But that's not really how it was done. Even in the most rushed emergency in the Civil War, you wouldn't do it with just taking the saw and cutting through the skin, the muscle, the tendons, and everything just to get to the bone, would you?
Actually, you do.
You do?
Yeah.
No way.
An amputation is not a complicated operation at all. When I became a guide, I wasn't terribly interested, as odd as it sounds, in medical care in the Civil War. I was a student of the battle. But then I realized if I'm going to sit in the guide room and people find out what my day job is, I better learn something.
They're going to ask you questions.
And so I can remember one of my fellow guides, I just I didn't make a habit of talking about what I was going to do when I went back to work on Monday, but I actually had an amputation scheduled on an accident victim whose limb wasn't surviving, and I mentioned that, and he said, well, how long does that take you, Doc? And I said, oh, we're not hurrying, I mean, it's 45 minutes, 30 minutes, and he said, oh, man, I thought it would be like 3 hours. It's really not complicated.
No.
There are 5 steps to an amputation.
Okay.
And the first step is what you just said, Matt. You take a knife, and you make an incision, and you go down to the bone.
Right.
And once you get to the bone, you put the knife down and you take a saw.
Right.
And you cut through the bone, and then you
By
take
hand?
Well, they did.
They did.
Yeah, that's the biggest difference.
You got
now.
power tools now.
We do. We got batteries on the saws now.
Jesus Christ.
But then you
makes a really
take
cool
something.
sound.
I bet it.
But then you take something called an amputation knife that looks exactly the same in 2021 as it did in 1863. When you look at amputation kits from the Civil War, those big, long, double-edged knives, that's exactly what we use. Once you cut through the bone or the bones, depending on what level you're working at, the next step is to go right between the opening of the bones and out the back, the other side of the limb, and then you stop the bleeding, and then you sew it up. And that's all there is to it. It's much, much, much more difficult to try to salvage that limb and put the fracture back together. That may take 2.5 hours.
Today.
Yes. Yeah. And of course, that
They wouldn't
wasn't
even
an
try
option.
that back then.
No. The only thing that they could do then when they did what was called a resection, where we didn't amputate, we're going to leave the extremity, they could remove pieces of bone and try to clean up the damage. But
I think I've
that
seen
didn't always-
pictures of that. Did it look like you're kind of like rubbery wherever the...
Yeah, it did. And it's hard for people nowadays, and even particularly then, to conceive that you could be better off without your body part than with it. But that's really true.
Yeah.
Some of those pictures that you see, their leg is 4 inches short, they're walking with a
Right.
shoe, and there's the bone has not healed and it's not stable.
Yeah.
That's not a very functional extremity.
His buddies call him Hop Along.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah, he just has a
or
lot of-
Eileen. Sorry, bad jokes.
No, that's good. That's good. I
Mommy, I keep running around in a circle.
Yeah. But part of that gets also into the science of artificial limbs, which is much more sophisticated now than it was back then.
Oh, yeah.
But people then and now many times can't conceive that they would be better off without that body part.
Yeah, it's hard to think of parting with a thing you were born with.
Right,
And-
but an amputation is a Civil War surgeon could do a below knee amputation in 5 to 8 minutes.
Wow. And so aside from power tools, procedure's still the same, right? And that long knife is still the same. But I noticed in the surgeon's kit, there's a lot of other things in there. Are those all for amputation or for other purposes or both?
That kit's called an amputation kit because all of those instruments are designed to be used with that operation. Now, that's to be distinguished from what's called a surgeon's kit, which is different than a medical kit.
And a field medical kit. So
Right.
there's probes and
But
tourniquets and
all different types.
A lot of the instruments in an amputation kit are very similar to what we would use to nip off pieces of bone or to file off pieces of bone.
Okay, so let's go through the process here, step by step by painful step. Okay, Civil War amputation procedure.
Civil War amputation.
Here you go, folks.
The patient is evaluated. If they can get a consultation where a second opinion is brought in by one of those other operators, yes, does this need to be taken off or can we resect it? And then they would be taken to the operating room, which means they'd be moved from inside the barn to be put on the door that was on the wooden sawhorses. And the surgeon would wipe off his instruments on his apron after he rinsed it in the water. And the only reason they wiped it off is because clotted blood gets sticky.
Sure.
And they didn't have any concept of it being clean. And the patient would be put to sleep. I think the single most important thing Fran and I want people to know medically on any battlefield tour is 95% of all the surgery in the Civil War was done under a general anesthetic. It was not bite a bullet. It was not bite a stick. It wasn't dance
Take a
with
swig of
wolves.
rub.
Right.
And so the anesthetic would be administered. So, Fran, why don't you talk a little bit about how they gave an anesthetic?
What was the anesthetic? How'd they do it?
So we don't have IVs, but we've already kind of alluded to the fact there's two other ways to get medication into a human body. One is through the rectum.
Of course.
But the other way is through your lungs. Your lungs are a phenomenal place to transfer stuff into your bloodstream. If you think about it, you're exchanging oxygen and carbon dioxide while we're talking.
Sure.
There's a spot in your lung called the alveoli where there's only one cell separating air from blood. That's how close air and blood become. Covers about enough area of 2 tennis courts is what we would teach people. So it's a great way.
Wait, what do you mean it covers the area of
if
2
you would
tennis?
lay that, if you lay those alveoli out, they would cover 2 tennis courts. That's how it's balled up inside of you. Like the alveoli look like cauliflower in there. But that exchange area is phenomenal, and we even use it in trauma resusc. If we don't have an IV, we can squirt medication down there and get it into your bloodstream.
How do you spell Avila?
Oh, go ahead. I'm not going to spell anything.
Fran has many attributes. Spelling is
not one of them.
ALVE.
O-V-E.
O-L-I is the plural. Alveolus, alveoli.
V-E-O-L-I. Okay.
Alveoli.
All right. Sorry, I'm listening. I just wanted to look this thing up.
So the trick is they had discovered 2 great anesthetics, ether and chloroform. Now, these are liquids.
And how long had they been in existence, Fran?
1846 in Queen Elizabeth.
1842, 1846. So it easily predated the Civil War.
Right. But these are liquids that become a gas. And before people would go crazy, every time you fill your car up, you see the vapors. You put the liquid in, and you see the vapors coming out. These agents do that. They're hydrocarbons for the technical term, but basically what they do, that vapor, when you inhale it, goes into your lungs, gets into your bloodstreams, and to this day we're not sure how anesthesia works, but basically it scrambles your head so that you can't recall and do anything.
It's pretty sophisticated.
Yeah, my job today is the same as it was back then. There's only 4 things that we can give you. We can give you pain relief. We can make it so you don't remember. Today we can protect reflexes that would kill you, like your heart stop, and produce a surgical field for Rick to do his job. These drugs, ether and chloroform, do all 4 of those to some extent, not as well as we can do today with modern stuff. So you take a 16 by 16 rag and you fold it, and it ends up looking like an ice cream cone, for want of a better word. You put the wide end over the patient's mouth, and then you take the liquid and start dripping it on the pointy end of the ice cream cone. As it goes through there, the patient inhales it, it vaporizes, and they fall off to sleep. Now, the beauty of these 2 drugs is that they won't let you kill somebody because they don't have EKG monitors. They don't have devices that I have where I can see the oxygen at the tip as it's leaving your heart.
Right.
So what they would watch for is muscle relaxation, and slowly your diaphragm paralyzes. It stops moving. And when your diaphragm stops paralyzing, stops moving, you're not breathing, and you wake up. So of all the things going against these poor Civil War surgeons, the 2 things going for them was chloroform and ether. Now, chloroform is used more. Ether has an annoying habit of blowing up.
Yeah, which is bad on a battlefield.
and bad at night under a kerosene lamp.
Right.
But the problem is, Rick's ready to work. When you see things in movies and people say, oh my God, there's no anesthesia, you don't just go right to sleep with ether and chloroform. Last night when you went to sleep, you turned the lights off, you're kind of wide awake, and then you're kind of drifting, where you're not awake and not asleep, and then you go into deep sleep, and in the morning you come back up. You're drifting, not awake, and that happens chemically with ether and chloroform. So putting a patient to sleep, the person dripping the stuff is watching, and they're watching as the respiration slow down, and the surgeon might notice the leg starting to relax. And when the leg relaxes, they're not asleep yet. That pain sometimes will make them wake up and scream. And that's what the soldiers watching Rick work outside in the barn say, oh my God, he's not asleep. No, he's going to sleep. And then Rick does his surgery, and I always laugh at Rick. The guy doing anesthesia for Rick is watching the diaphragm stop moving.
Yeah.
And he's got this rag on, and he looks at him and says, that's it, I'm done. And he takes off the rag. He's got 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And he better move fast because this guy's waking up.
But they can give him more.
Yeah, we can keep redelivering it, but that's the speed of this drug. But then when you wake up, you go through the same thing. You're deep sleep. You start to wake up. Now your leg hurts, and you wake up.
It's a very safe and controlled process, largely because of the chemistry of these agents.
Right.
And I would add two things. Number one, the person delivering the anesthetic isn't really always trained to do it, but it tells you how safe it is that we think Sickles' anesthetic was delivered by a chaplain. A medical purveyor, somebody who sells medical supplies might do it.
Yeah.
One of the assistant surgeons.
Or they would let you do it. They'd say, hold this over.
Yeah. And as long as you knew they taught you how to do it, it could be done. The other thing is what Fran's alluding to is something that still happens today. When you're put off to sleep to have a hernia fixed, when you're put to sleep, your muscles will contract as you're going to sleep. But you guys have medicine now to prevent that so that you don't wake up feeling like somebody beat you with a baseball bat.
And we also get over that not awake, not asleep thing by a drug, Dipervan.
Yeah.
What Dipervan drugs does is take you from wide awake to sleep, but it only lasts about 90 seconds. That gives me time to get the other medication in to get you to sleep.
Yeah.
Now, Dipervan replaced a drug called thiopental. If you guys know growing up, pentothal.
Oh, pentothal.
Pentothal, we just had the anniversary of the Japanese attack in Pearl Harbor.
Yeah.
The major amount of deaths were due to pentothal because they didn't know that hypovolemia in pentothal causes death.
So if you're bleeding to death and you're given that agent,
You die.
yeah.
And
Is it a blood thinner? Or?
we call them induction agents.
It's what puts you to sleep.
It
but
puts you to
its
sleep.
chemistry is different than ether and chloroform.
Yeah, ether and chloroform are anesthetics because under the right conditions, I mean, Rick will tell you, we've had people on the table 10 hours working on them that I can get you into a steady state where you're not awake, not asleep, and by watching your vital signs keep you asleep.
Right.
Hours of boredom, moments of terror is how they
That's
describe
what anesthesia
anesthesia.
is.
And I tell people all the time, they don't pay me to put you to sleep. They pay me to wake you up.
Yeah.
Anybody can put you to sleep.
Right. I could do that.
But
yeah.
anesthetics were available in the Civil War.
Oh, for sure.
And they were used. You cannot now. Let me take that back. Bayard Wilson did cut his leg off. And Rick, if your arm's that mangled and it's hanging by a thread, you don't have any sensation in there,
No,
right?
no, not really.
Yeah,
Not really.
you can do it.
I mean, you don't have any sensation below the break, right? Do you have it above?
No, you'll have sensation if below a broken bone if there's no nerve damage, and usually.
Well, no, I mean if it's hanging by a thread.
yeah.
So you're not feeling what's hanging, but above it, are you
actually?
feeling it?
There is some degree of leftover memory sensation that
Phantom limbs or whatever.
Exactly. But Bayard Wilkerson out on Barlow's Knoll here at Gettysburg, the legend is he completed his own amputation with
Right.
his pocket knife. Yeah.
but in the
Tim Smith doesn't believe that.
Yeah. I'm going to say if it's hanging there, it's okay.
It's just how hard is it to take a pocket knife and go, just get that last little bit.
Yeah.
But
like in the Crimean War, there's reports where the medical teams would try to get to wounded soldiers while they still had the anesthetic from the injury. When you get hit by a bullet, it doesn't hurt initially. So if they could pull the limb, they would try to do it. That scene on Master and Commander, probably true, but if they did that in the Civil War, most people, you couldn't. Some of the stuff that was done in the Civil War, you can't do that.
Well, the other thing that's so relevant to this is, again, let's go back to a division field hospital like the Spangler Barn where they're doing surgeries. This guy's in front of me, and there's 75 other guys laying out there that I got to get to.
Right.
I just want you anesthetized. I don't really care if you're moving or not. And that phase of excitement where you're moving even though you're asleep, if somebody can hold it down, I'm going to get going. Because
so it wasn't just stick in the mouth, everybody gets around, holds them down, and then you just take one rusty old hacksaw and just start cutting through. So let's so we anesthetize them, right? All right, they're out. Now, makes the cut with the knife. Let's say I got shot right above my knee. Okay. And so it's got a
Sickles injury.
Yeah. So it's got to come off above the knee.
It's got to come off above the damaged tissue.
Right. So like middle of the femur or something like that. Okay. Now there's a big muscle there.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of cutting.
Some big blood vessels too.
Big blood vessels.
Okay. Now what is technically, what is a blood vessel?
An artery or a vein.
Okay, so something that carries the blood.
And in your
Either-
leg, they'd be the size of your little finger.
Yeah,
The size of your pinky.
the femoral artery
Femoral's the big
high
one.
up towards your hip is about as big as your index finger.
Right.
You only need 3 beats of the heart with that open, and you're in shock.
And you're, yeah.
Yeah.
So you've got to cut through all of this stuff. The femoral artery. What do you do? Like, what are you doing to it? Because I mean, you're not just like cutting through and then there's blood flying everywhere like a Tim Burton movie. Like, it's what do you do?
That's when the anesthesia provider looks up and gives you a look like your mother does.
And
What's
then,
going on down there?
and then they say something like this: "It's bleeding." Oh yeah, like I didn't know that.
Wipe my face. Wipe my face.
Well, in modern day, if we can get a tourniquet on what looks like a blood pressure cuff with compressed air, compressed high enough to occlude blood flow, we have that control. They did use tourniquets in the Civil War. They also used direct pressure right above the area of the amputation to control the bleeding until the surgeon could ligate or tie off the biggest vessel.
They had clamps too, right?
Yeah, they did have clamps.
They did have some.
Okay, so that was what I was trying to get at, was when you have everything cut and you've got that femoral artery exposed, you've got to clamp that off. How hard is it in the field with bloody, non-gloved hands to go in there and grab it? I mean, what would you use to grab it? Would you have a tool, or would you just grab it with your own hands?
Some of those other instruments that you see, Matt, in the amputation kit are clamps that they would use to either clamp down on or get a hold of and hold it up so they could quickly tie it off.
So then tie it off with like a suture?
Yep,
or
suture, horsehair.
Horsehair.
They did have silk sutures. Interestingly, in the South, where they faced a lot of supply problems, they used a lot of horsehair, and they would boil it to make it more pliable.
Soft, yeah.
And that actually had the advantage of sterilizing
it. Yeah.
Right.
All right. When it's done, when it's removed, then what do you do?
Well, somebody takes it away, and then I'm not concerned about it anymore.
What did it?
But Rick, tell them though. Tell them when that happens in the OR. It's a weird moment.
It is a weird moment, and
Because you've actually amputated a leg or two or something, or a limb.
A lot.
Yeah, okay,
well,
several.
I don't want to. An amputation is not a success. Let me make that clear.
Right.
So, but if you do orthopedic surgery, you do amputations. They're part of the practice.
Sure. And so in your case, the cut is complete, and then you just turn around and hand the limb to a nurse or something who walks off. And what do they do with it?
Well, it depends. I mean, a lot. Everything has to go to the pathology department to be verified. Believe it or not, some religions mandate that body part be buried with, buried in a religious
consecrated
ceremony.
ground.
Right.
Yeah.
Sometimes they're cremated. We know here in the Civil War, they piled them up and then carted them away and had burial pits.
Limb pits.
Limb pits.
Which have got to be all around this battlefield.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that if you did ground probing radar, you could find limb pits.
Yeah.
I've heard Ron Kirkwood's book on Too Much for Human Endurance about the Spangler Farm, which is just an excellent book. Ron has some feelings about where the limb pits might be out at the Spangler Farm, just from the descriptions. And I suspect there's limb pits under Valentine Hall up on Seminary Ridge, because
by the Hummelbaugh Farm.
Yeah, the seminary was a hospital with 800 patients in it. And,
Got to put them somewhere.
Yeah, exactly.
And you're not going to take them too far away to bury them.
Culp's Farm would have to have some around.
But at the end of the operation in the Civil War, they used a lot of what was called lint, which was literally that, not bandages per se, but lint. And that's what they would stuff in there to absorb the drainage and the blood that was going to come.
Okay, so lint. I've always heard and read about lint. We need more lint. What the hell was lint for? Are we talking like pocket lint, belly button lint? Like what are they?
There were women who would sit around and take cloth and and take it apart into lint, and then through health fairs they would get together, and that's one of the things that they did, and then they would donate that to the Sanitary Commission or to the Christian Commission or to the military.
And what purpose does it serve
It's
in a wound?
It's absorbent, and if you pack it, there's enough pressure, it will stop.
So it's for wound packing.
Yes.
Okay.
And we can't stop. Even today, we can't stop all the bleeding when you let the tourniquet down, and so we'll put a tight bandage on and a drain in. There has to be drainage in the Civil War for blood, and then ultimately for pus, because as I said, 80% of this stuff gets infected.
And one of the questions that was given us is, what do they do to stop that lint? We talked about diarrhea to open up this wonderful show. Your body does everything in its capability to stop bleeding.
Right.
And there's a thing called a clotting cascade or clotting process. And it needs a membrane to start that. That lint produces a place where the blood can get on and start to coagulate. And the person who asked is a medical person. We've now been able to identify those clotting factors, and now we have packs. If you're shot in the belly, we open and we throw those clotting factors in the bandage in. You all have seen it. If you've ever had a scab or something healing, that's clotting. And that cascade needs a lattice work. Am I saying it correctly? I'm on the stool that's thinking, by the way.
Is it?
Chris Gwynn, you broke this. But the lint, again, it's like one of those things, it works. So if you stop the bleeding and you have a lattice work for the blood to start to coagulate on, they get better. Yeah. So it's like, why does it work? It works for lots of reasons that we know today they just didn't know back then.
But they knew practically it worked.
Yeah, practically it worked.
Okay. And so you've got it packed with this lint, and then you're going to cover that with a bandage, right? And then when you change the bandage, you got to change the lint? Or how long does the lint stay in there for?
Until the drainage, it floats out on the drainage, which is often the case. There was a unique thing they did in the Civil War where they would ligate or tie off the big vessels, and they'd leave the stitch long and hanging out of the wound. And for some reason, the surgeons felt that they could know that their patient was safe by 5 or 6 days afterwards when they would tug on this suture, and if it came off and there was no bleeding, then everything was going to be fine. When you read about people bleeding to death 3 or 4 weeks or 2 weeks after their initial surgery, that's when the surgeon found out they aren't going to be fine, because that's usually because there's an infection, and the artery is going to open back up again. And I dare say trying to do surgery on something that's been infected that was operated on 2 weeks ago is a whole different operation.
Sure.
And it's much easier to bleed to death in that setting than it is at the Spangler Barn.
And we talk about that. One of the best demonstrations Rick does, he takes a piece of rubber hose and says, this is what the artery's like the day of surgery. Clamps it. It stays there. Then he takes a piece of macaroni and clamps it, and it rips through. That's what infection does. And we have a story of a soldier named Beals at Camp Letterman. Has an amputation, looks like he's going to go back, but he doesn't. He gets infected. They rush him to try to do 3 surgeries to save him, and Rick and I talk about that. Their heart had a break when they watched that rotten artery just go into his chest, because there was nothing they could do.
Because there was nothing.
And the more they clamped it, it was like clamping a hard-boiled egg. They couldn't seal it. And we've had those. We've had patients that have died on the table, and you sit there, and it's like, I'm out. I've run out of everything. And you feel like you failed. You feel like, son of a bitch.
Yeah,
what did we do wrong? And you haven't. And these surgeons are going through this.
Yeah, every day. Well, not every day, but
another well-known name that happened to was Dorsey Pender. His wound was not that severe. It was a shrapnel wound. It caused a lot of bruising in his leg. But he gets in a wagon and is taken down to Stanton. And by the time they get down there, his leg is probably infected. And they tried to do an amputation to save his life, and they can't control the bleeding, and he bleeds to death. That's what he died from.
Bleeding to death. So what happens to a person who's bleeding to death? I mean, obviously your blood is leaving your body, but as they're dying, what is happening to the body? I guess let's say I bleed to death out. I get shot in a battle and nobody takes me back to the aid station. I'm laying out there in the field and I bleed to death. What am I looking forward to?
When you're shot, your body fires off a chemical called adrenaline. And if it's not already pumping through your veins as you're heading into battle, it is now. Is
that why guys often get shot and say at first I didn't feel anything?
Most of them don't feel anything from that numbness from hitting them. It's like for men, it's when you cut yourself shaving. It doesn't hurt till you see it.
Right.
But this adrenaline is a remarkable thing, and your body is a remarkable thing. When you start to bleed, your body has mechanisms in your carotid arteries and the arch of your aorta that say, man, you're losing volume. So the first thing it starts to do is to shunt the blood to your core, to your heart and your brain. Your brain can only live without oxygen for 4 minutes. That's why they're cold. That's why their hands are shaking.
No blood to the
extremities. They're cold. And as it gets more and more in there, their heart rate picks up. The first sign of somebody bleeding is your blood pressure increases because your body's saying, oh, wait, there's not enough blood going to my brain. Increase the blood pressure. As you bleed out, and like I said, 6 liters, 2 large bottles of soda is all the blood you have. And when you lose half of the bottle, your body's in a shock phase.
Yeah.
So now it's trying to conserve blood and pump the heart and the head and lets everything else get cold. So now your brain runs on oxygen. As you start to lose the oxygen, your senses pick up, your hearing picks up, your eyes focus goes strange, and you start to, as you slowly slip into that, you just literally pass away. You kind of pass out, and then your heart stops. That blood is a problem. When you're shot on the field, if the wound's bad enough, and we wonder like how some of these people survive the wounds, sometimes the heat of the projectile or the way the wound was done prevented them from losing. What's Hancock say as soon as he falls?
Don't let me bleed to death.
Don't let me bleed to death. They know to do it. And even today, soldiers carry tourniquets and stuff with them. And actually, Rick and his wife are involved in a program called Stop the Bleed, where we're teaching public today how to stop somebody who's bleeding.
I just carry around a packet of Bleed Stop with me.
Yeah.
You know, that stuff is amazing.
It is. But if we can teach people to do CPR, we can teach them how to put on a tourniquet. And in the world we live in, like the mass shooting in Las Vegas, there were more people that bled to death that could have been saved, or school shootings, tragically.
Oh, yeah.
And that's why first responders, policemen, firemen, and certainly EMTs and paramedics, the priority now is to stop the bleeding. And that can be taught to lay people, and there is a move to do that. But like Fran said, there's this shunting of blood to the most important parts of the body. Now, there are some wounds that are instantaneously fatal. If you get shot in the brain and it goes right into your brain, it's going to kill you within seconds. Heart. But when you read about people dying in the Civil War, people who die suddenly, whether it's at the moment of injury or like Armistead did 2 days later, something happened to their circulation. If somebody dies 3 weeks later, that probably is from infection. And so sudden death is almost always
with the pump.
Yeah,
with the train
something to
system
do
and the
with the circulatory system.
Right. But that adrenaline is amazing stuff. And if you've ever been in been in a car accident, you feel the exact same thing that soldiers did. The world stops. Slow motion. When soldiers say they could see the bullet coming, they can with adrenaline. When they say they could hear their heartbeat, they can. Because the hearing's up, your pupils dilate, and this is all before you get shot. Your body is in a save itself. And we know, I always smile, Pickett's charge, those guys didn't see a thing coming across that field. They saw smoke. They saw the man beside it. They use all 4 senses. They can smell the sulfur. Their hands are out when you hear of elbow to elbow, shoulder to shoulder courage. Their body's doing everything they can. When they get hit, it's instinctive to pick up a limb and take it with them. Some of those soldiers are tripping coming forward and not realizing that their leg's been taken off. Their hearing's up, they can smell, they can see, they start, flashbacks are common. This is a lot of work from a book I use a lot called On Combat by Grossman's his last name. Eric, you had his first name, what was it?
Oh, I can't remember now.
But I even called him. I even called him. He said, "You're right." He said, "Soldiers on the battlefield, urinating, common, defecating, common, all related to adrenaline." All right.
Oh, you mean like during the battle?
You're not a coward. That's happening. Fear,
It's a physiological.
Right.
remorse. And you make decisions faster. Your brain moves at a higher speed.
Right.
If you've ever been in a car accident, you say, "How did I not get hit?" Your brain made the decision before you, almost reflexively. All this stuff has not changed from the first time man has decided to put a bullet to another man
Right.
or kill him. Those sensations are there. And like I told you at the beginning, they'll say afterwards, an electric sensation, if it's a aching sensation. When you're shot in the gut doesn't have the nerve endings that make sharp pain. It's more of a cramping type pain.
Which is miserable.
Which is miserable. But all that is not a sign of cowardice. And that's what these soldiers on this battlefield, plus they're 19 to 23. Do you remember being 19 to 23?
I do.
And remember you were going to live forever.
I was, and I was never going to get sick, and I was always going to be healthy.
Right.
And I love the line from the Patton movie where he says, "We're not going to die for our country. We're going to let the other sons of bitches die for theirs." That's where these guys are at. They're upset that they're shot. And now they're facing disfiguring surgery. I can remember in high school when 3 pimples got together on my forehead. I thought it was the worst day of my life. And now we're going to cut off arms and do disfiguring surgery.
But the super pimple is bad, though.
It's terrible.
Yeah.
Because it's always right between your eyes.
It is.
Yeah.
It's always here.
Yeah.
What is that about?
Yeah,
is there
it's
like one big
I think it's
follicle there or
adrenaline.
something?
Yeah. I think it's when the girl you've been chasing finally noticed you. The pimple goes, "Oh, here I am."
Yeah.
No, that's true.
Yeah,
it was always timed with when the girl finally responded.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, no, I can't go out this week.
Yeah, I can't go out with you, Cyclops.
Yeah.
But all of this stuff is related to adrenaline. And then afterwards, their body tries to insulate them from it. They have a movie, a film clip. That's why you can't convince a soldier that what happened didn't happen.
Right.
Because their brain is sensitizing, and it's all this work now on post-traumatic stress and how we're doing it, the remorse after the battle. How come I didn't die? He did die. Imagine, and I always tell people on my tours, what it was like walking, those that could, walking back from Pickett's charge.
Yeah.
We're talking about canister that's aimed at the belt buckle of the enemy, so most of it hits the ground and bounces up underneath you. Talk about a limb pit. There was pieces of men out in that field you
Everywhere.
couldn't identify.
Right.
That stays with them forever.
Well, we don't realize that too, because I think movies do a good job of
They
sanitizing.
sanitize it, yeah.
But I mean, people are being ripped to shreds.
Yeah.
And there's that one account. I want to say it's from a Texas guy, but I don't remember who it's from. But I believe it's about here, where knapsacks and heads and limbs are flying in the air.
That's actually
Is that here?
8th Ohio. Lieutenant Sawyer is describing what he sees on the left end of Pickett's charge from the
that's right.
cannonade up on Cemetery Hill, and it's exactly right. Heads, arms, legs, knapsacks, all flying through the air.
It's very hard to imagine.
If you've seen the movie Saving Private Ryan, the beginning scene, Vietnam soldiers will say that's pretty close. And soldiers will say that's the sound.
The guy in front of me was crying. He was a World War II vet.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Put your hands over your ears and talk. They say that's what it sounds like. Rick, who's the guy that was in the German Reformed Church that wrote about the effect of canister? I know you'll have it, 153rd Pennsylvania. He described the effect of canister from his window in the German Reformed Church.
And it was like pumpkin.
Yeah, he said it
rolling out of a
reminded me.
wagon.
He said the effect of our canister reminded me of a wagon of pumpkins on an elevation, and the tailboard had been removed, and slowly the pumpkins roll out one by one and hit the ground with that awful smashing sound. That's the stuff that we don't talk about. And one of the reasons Rick and I are here today, when people study the Civil War, they study lines blue and red. When we do our tours, we end the first day at Fairfield, or according to Wayne Watts, if you're not off the first day in 40 minutes, you're done. Not going to make it. But it never ends for some of these soldiers.
Right.
For them and their families, it goes on. We have soldiers that will die from malnutrition because they can't swallow food. We have soldiers that will commit suicide on the battlefield because they know they're hurt too bad. So this is some of the stuff that we try to bring to what we're doing.
Well, before we go to the break and then get to the questions, let's talk about disease. We'll use the ones that are fun to get as the example of how
I see where we're going.
Fun or expensive.
Very enjoyable.
fun and expensive.
Yeah.
But we'll use that as a way to illustrate how they dealt with it, because it's all the same thing. It doesn't matter how you get them. So, venereal disease. What were the more common ones of the day?
Just as they are today, gonorrhea, syphilis. Gonorrhea is a venereal disease caused by a bacteria. Syphilis, but gonorrhea generally is confined to just your urinary system.
Okay.
It can affect muscles and tendons and make you septic, but that's rare.
Can it kill you?
Yes.
I mean, outside of that, does it eventually kill you, or
It can if it impairs your kidney function. I think most people listening to this podcast probably know A.P. Hill he did have gonorrhea.
Okay.
And
but it's also known as clap.
Yeah, the clap.
The clap, yeah. That wasn't an instruction, Eric.
Yeah.
There,
And do you know why?
Yeah.
Do you know why it's called a clap?
Hold on. No.
Courtesy of Ed Bars. It's called a clap because when you go to pee, you can't get it out. So you have to clap your member to break up the pus and adhesions so you can urinate.
Oh, my God.
now,
And he's right.
A.P. Hill may have
Well,
been...
now I know what the clap does.
That's exactly
Yeah.
right. A.P. Hill may have been days away from dying from kidney failure when he was killed right before the end of the war. So
really?
You can die from gonorrhea, but also
But
syphilis.
you die from the fact that the urine backs up into your bladder, then it goes right up into your
Back
kidney.
into the
and then your kidneys quit.
Yeah.
Yeah. But,
Because what's in the bladder has already been processed through the kidneys,
Right. And it's
right?
usually
then-
or
sterile.
it's really almost as much a mechanical problem where
Oh, okay.
you can't pee, and now all that urine builds up, and if it stays in the kidney, it damages.
Got it,
Basically,
got it.
in healthy people, urine is sterile.
Yeah.
Yes.
Ergo, you can drink it in the desert.
Yes,
You can get that
if you
back.
have to,
Yeah.
you can
You can
drink your
drink it.
urine.
And not me.
But there's also a venereal disease called syphilis, which is much more serious. It can certainly cause urinary problems, but then it can spread throughout your body and actually spread to your brain. And there's some very interesting work, again, going back to General Hill. He clearly had gonorrhea, but if you follow his behavior
Might have had syphilis.
and his handwriting, which steadily deteriorated through the Civil War,
Fine motor.
he might have had syphilis as well.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That guy got around.
Yeah.
Good for him.
All from
So-
one weekend in New York.
Yeah, really. One youthful indiscretion.
That's right.
So he says.
The phrase "a night with Venus, a lifetime with Mercury" comes to mind.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
It goes back to we don't have much to use, so let's use mercury.
Yeah.
And they would instill mercury through catheters which were made out of metal.
I've seen those things. Those are scary.
Yeah, into the penis and the urethra where the disease was rampant, and hope that it would take care of the problem.
So here's what I don't understand about the mindset, the attitude of people back in those days, medical professionals back in those days towards these things. Okay, how long, roughly, ballpark, was putting mercury up your pee hole the way to treat problems, venereal disease?
By the end of the Civil War, mercurials in general had fallen out of favor.
Okay, but how long prior to the Civil
Oh my
War?
gosh, decades.
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 Okay. So nobody, no doctor, not one single doctor said, all I end up doing is poisoning my patients. They still have the clap or whatever the hell I'm trying to cure. No one said maybe this isn't working.
Or they don't recognize it.
Yeah.
They don't recognize
remember,
it.
there-
What happened? Because that's a poison, though.
It's not like an instantaneous.
No, I know
thing,
that,
though.
but you
Like,
do it
have
over
to-
a period of
yeah.
time.
Your hair
Yeah.
falls out, your teeth get weak.
Yeah, and it's like, well, what's the difference here since I've started seeing you? I've been putting mercury up your dick. So what? Part of my French. Well, the kids aren't in the room
You can
today,
always
so it's
tell the
okay.
temperature, though.
I think it goes back.
Those
let
really
me
hot
get this
days were
back on the
particularly
rails.
hard.
I had a niece that had a Mercury once. It wasn't a good car.
I think it goes back to the lack of knowledge and training that the physicians of the
No,
day
I understand
had.
that,
Yeah.
but that doesn't excuse not being able to put two and two together.
Where
That's
everybody
not
else is doing it.
Yeah.
Huh?
Everybody
it was
else is
standard
doing it.
medical care.
But nobody else is putting two and two together.
You're talking about something that's like way more in depth than even like, hey, maybe don't piss and shit in the stream right up from where you're gonna.
They figure that out eventually.
Take your drinking. Yeah, eventually.
I tease Rick all the
About
time.
the same time they figured out mercury was killing you.
That's
So,
a
like,
good point. So it took
look
the
at,
war.
Look at like the 16th century. A good bleeding with leeches to gas the devil out of them was a perfectly acceptable.
They were
method of
still in
treatment.
small circles, still doing bleeding in the 1900s, right?
It had pretty much
Or
fallen
1800s.
out of favor by the time the Civil War.
Okay,
Kill the father of the country, and it kind of like
Yeah, they said it's
But you know what? I tell Rick all the time. Years from now, they're going to look back at his practice in the 2020s and say, "My God, can you believe they put titanium in people?"
Yeah,
You know? And it's
I know.
it's where we
Because we'll find out it causes syphilis.
Yeah.
Well, I hope not. Otherwise, I'm going to have a lot of.
Well, Rick, let's talk about maggots and leeches because that was
Yes, maggots.
maggots. One of the questions, and I don't mean to jump ahead, but people wonder, well, if maggots work so well, why didn't they use them more? Maggots just happened.
Right.
Okay. I mean, if you're laying in a division field hospital and it's July 5th after the battle's been done for 2 days, what are there? You can't breathe without breathing in flies. You've got an open wound, you've got a dressing that's got blood on it, you are covered with flies, there are going to be maggots there. Maggots are an excellent treatment because they only eat dead tissue.
Right.
Now, there are accounts in some of the hospital books. Roland Mouse Grappling with Death is about the Second Corps hospitals here. And yeah, it's a tome. And there's a very descriptive section in there where a Confederate talks about he didn't really mind those worms so much. He didn't mind the crunching noise they made when they were chewing on the tissue because there were so many of them there.
Oh my God.
But it was a very effective treatment, and then conversely, leeches were also used sometimes to take blood out of engorged limbs because that's what they take in.
Okay.
And they have use in modern medicine because leeches actually inject an enzyme that will cause the blood to basically
Coagulate.
dissolve about and come out that way.
and a leech will only attach to live tissue. So, like
Right.
if you have a plastic surgeon and you got fingers, if the leech will attach, that's a good sign. If the leech
Okay.
won't, that's a bad sign.
Gotcha.
Don't we also use maggots still in some places? I've heard it used for like burn victims.
This is what I'll tell you, Eric. I had the occasion to use maggots on 2 patients, but it was accidental. These were men who didn't take care of themselves. They were homeless guys, and it's a little disconcerting when they come back to the office and you take their cast off and there's all those squirmy things underneath there.
No, he can't do that. He's going to go, uh-oh.
Alcohol kills them right away.
Yeah.
but-
Maggots or the
Maggots,
homeless guys? Okay.
maggots. The alcohol takes a while to kill the homeless guys.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Good God. Okay, so besides mercury in the wang, what other treatments would they do for venereal disease? Ipecac. They would make you throw up.
Ipecac.
Not specifically for venereal disease, but that was a
treatment for everything.
for
but for
disease.
venereal disease,
There really was?
You lived with it.
That was it. You live with it. Okay.
And what Rick is telling you, that syphilis, when you get to the 4th stage of syphilis, it usually comes in your 70th generation. Like if you live that long, you go crazy.
Yeah, we call it tertiary syphilis, and you go crazy. I mean, it affects your brain.
That's the part I'm looking forward to the most.
Yeah.
So, no, I don't have syphilis. I'm just kidding.
There is treatment for it.
Okay.
Yeah, today
I
we
know.
can treat it.
Well, I would just skip it, just because I want to go to that crazy part. I just want to see what that's like.
Back
Oh,
then,
don't
you
call
get
it
colored-
There isn't any treatment for that.
They call it flick.
back then you get colored glasses, and eventually you go insane.
Listen to a lot of Led Zeppelin.
Yeah. Well, I do that anyway.
I know. Me too.
All right, so what were some common diseases besides diarrhea here? What is this?
Let me
here?
do this
Top
one.
10 degrees. Okay, go ahead.
So one of the other things that you stumble across, there's a guy that his name's Thomas Lowry that looked at court-martials. 5,000 court-martials.
Yes.
And what he noticed is that the court-martials had degrees of drunkenness. And alcohol is a problem. When Meade takes command, cleaning out, getting men to come forward. So for all of us that just had a New Year's, and I'll ask you guys at the end, pick your deal. He noticed that there were 10 degrees in Union court-martials of drunkenness. Number 1, slightly drunk. Number 2, in liquor, but not drunk. 3, intoxicated, but not drunk. 4, too drunk for duty. You were on a spree. Drunk and disorderly. Too drunk to do his duty. You're habitually drunk. Staggering drunk. And my favorite one of all, beastly drunk.
And those were medical diagnoses.
And I'm going to leave this here for you to put on your wall.
Thank you.
So that you can...
See, look, folks, we got it. This is crazy because they all sound about the same to me, except for slightly drunk. But once you hit number 5, what's the point of?
I like
differentiating,
too drunk, but not too drunk to do your duty. I don't know.
It must be.
What's your anesthetist?
It must be like pus. There's more detail then than there is now.
Yeah, right. All right. Well, thank you for the donation.
So where were you on New Year's? Where were you on New Year's, Matt?
I was at my friend's house on New Year's.
Not on the list.
No. Oh.
I don't think I even made the list.
Yeah, I would say I was either 2 in liquor but not drunk, or 3 intoxicated but not drunk.
I had 2 flutes of champagne and that was it.
So you were
the whole night.
You were not even slightly drunk.
No,
you were below that.
I wasn't even barely buzzed at all.
But you're not much of a drinker anyway.
No,
right?
not particularly.
Yeah. Ever since you killed that whole family of Vietnamese tourists.
Ever since I turned 30 and started having serious hangovers. You don't much care for hangovers. So I just don't drink it.
Amen.
Yeah, go to Scotch.
Yes, Scotch is delicious. Here's a question that I got for you guys, real quick. Jackson, Stonewall Jackson, dies of pneumonia, not the loss of his arm.
Before Rick tells you the answer, I'm going to tell you my friend is absolutely correct at what he's going to tell you, and there's been a recent article where we've been discussing whether he should put a rebuttal in.
Okay,
But
go ahead.
Yeah, so, the history books as everybody knows, everyone listening to this podcast knows, Thomas Stonewall Jackson was injured at the Battle of Chancellorsville. When you read about his injury, you need to read about the details of his evacuation. He was put on a stretcher, and then he was dropped twice,
right?
Because one of the stretcher bearers was injured, and also there was incoming artillery again. He hit the ground hard both times, and it's not a stretch to say that he probably suffered some broken ribs, or maybe even when he was knocked off his horse, he suffered broken ribs. Broken ribs cause bleeding, or can cause bleeding in the lungs. He then went into shock. When you read the description of Jackson that Dr. McGuire describes, he's clearly in shock. And then they stabilize him, and then they go ahead and do the amputation. And 8 days later, Stonewall Jackson dies of pneumonia.
Okay.
Now, as a physician, pneumonia to me is a very specific disease that's caused by bacteria that fill up those alveoli in your lung that Fran was talking about. It's an infection. I would tell you, we know nowadays that if you operate on people in shock, that their lungs can automatically get filled with blood, and you can send them down a slippery slope where they die of fluid in their lungs, but it's not pneumonia, it's blood, and it's called adult respiratory distress syndrome, ARDS. I think it's pretty clear to me as a surgeon who took care of accident victims, when you read Stonewall Jackson's account, we're splitting hairs probably by saying it's ARDS versus pneumonia. It was fluid in his lungs, but it wasn't classic pneumonia like he got an infection from breathing in a bacteria and died of that.
And you get that today from seatbelts. When a seatbelt stops you, it busts your ribs. You go into the ICU, I put you on a ventilator, and I turn the ventilator pressures up to try to hold those alveoli open to get the oxygen and CO2 to exchange. That's what's happening with COVID-19. This bacteria is putting fluid in that lung. Remember I said it's one cell between air and blood, and when that cell gets thicker and thicker and can't go through, it's a problem. And I agree with that.
And we know that if your timing is wrong on people with bad chest injuries, you can put them in a very high risk of dying from their chest injury, not their extremity injury. I had to be aware of when it was the right time to put that titanium rod in somebody's femur if they had a head or a brain injury. If it's the same thing there. So, did Jackson die of pneumonia? I don't think classically pneumonia, but he died of what we call dull respiratory distress.
And we would see that. That's how medicine has changed. With the Gulf Wars, we become very comfortable by letting you bleed on the OR table. We have a thing called hematocrit. Hemoglobin 10 is the number, but we found out by giving you fluid, we bring on this ARDS.
Yeah.
So now Rick says, and we say, Dr. Schroeder, should we give blood? We go by a number. We'll let you go to 6 because you're not going to get up and run a marathon when he's done with you. And so we said medicine changes. Medicine changes with each battle, and it is changing.
And that's really true of the Civil War as it is of any time of military conflict. The advances in the care of wounded and injured people advances tremendously during times of military conflict, and that was true of the Civil War. Mm-hmm. Every war had their advance that really made it so that when you and I get in a bad car wreck, we're better taken care of in 2021 than we were in 1955.
Also, our windshields are better than they were back then. Okay. We could probably sit here all day and talk about all the stuff because I have so many questions. We'll just have to have you guys back on to talk about more stuff. But right now we're going to take a commercial break, and then we're going to come back and we're going to answer the questions that our very anxious and excited medical audience, members of the medical field are in this questioning here. But anyway, so we're going to take a break. We'll be right back after these words.
You've heard us promote various ways that you can help us keep the show going, but one way we haven't pushed too much is our sutlery at addressinggettysburg.com/shop. That's a shame because we have designs over there by talented artists like Ty DeWitt of 1863 Designs and Mike Stretch of the Heritage Depot. So now we're promoting it. Buying shirts, hoodies, mugs, and other items from our sutlery not only helps us keep the lights on, but it also helps guys like Ty and Mike, and it helps spread the word about the show every time you wear an item or you sip from your mug. So head over to addressinggettysburg.com/shop and grab some merch. It's the perfect Christmas gift for the Gettys nerd in your family. That's addressinggettysburg.com/shop.
Gettysburg, A Nation Divided mobile app is relaunching this summer. Gettysburg, A Nation Divided is an award-winning mixed reality mobile application using augmented reality technology. It transports users into the most crucial moments in the Battle of Gettysburg, the turning point of the Civil War. Users can listen and watch historic figures share their stories as lifelike animated avatars, traverse 360-degree image sequences of the battlefield. Its cinematic battle sequences are narrated by actor Scott Eastwood. The mobile app is available for free on iOS and Android. It's designed to be used anywhere, at home, at school, at the park, or at Gettysburg National Military Park. It uses GPS to help guide you through your journey to see the stories and events unfold at the exact location where they occurred. So go into your phone's app store and get it now for free. That's Gettysburg, A Nation Divided. Well, the 2021 season is over, but that doesn't mean you can't get a jump on next season. In fact, Getty's Bike Tours will reward those who do so with a 15% discount. All you got to do is book a tour for 2 people or more between now and March 31st of 2022, and you'll receive 15% off your tour. So call 717-752-7752 and book today. Discount only applies to tours. Winter is coming. But that doesn't mean there's no reason for you to come to Gettysburg. In fact, there are more reasons for you to come to Gettysburg. Don't believe me? Well, how about not having to wait an hour and a half for a table at your favorite restaurant? How about not having to sit in traffic for a half an hour just to go 2 blocks in town? Are those not enough for you? Okay. How about seeing the battlefield with no leaves on the trees or corn that grows taller than a man to obscure your views? Now you'll actually be able to see the lay of the land. Now I've got your interest. All right, what about this? Licensed battlefield guides that we have on the show have less hectic schedules, and they're able to take you on a tour that will enhance that better visibility. Just as I thought. Now you're with me. And now that you are, head over to addressinggettysburg.com/LBG or call 717-693-0182 for larger groups. That's addressinggettysburg.com/LBG or 717-693-0182.
You're listening to the Addressing Gettysburg podcast with Matt Callery.
And we're back. Don't forget, ladies and gentlemen, when you want to ask a question, you have to be a patron. And we do that because we need your support. That's why we do that. And sorry to hold the questions hostage, but this is how the world works. We're going to start. We got a lot of questions here. People very interested in this. We have a lot of nurses and other types of medical professionals in our audience. I know one of them is one of those helicopter EMTs. He swoops in and saves your life and then goes about his day. Big hero out there in the Pittsburgh area. But first, we're going to start with Kevin Widener. I don't know what Kevin does. He could be a hero too, but he's from Kentucky. He says he's a fairly new patron. And first and foremost, thank you for your sacrifice in the service of our country. And secondarily for your work on it. I think he's talking to Eric here.
Yeah, that was
okay. Because Eric, would you like to say you're welcome for your service, or because I know you love it when people thank you for your service?
It was my pleasure, I suppose.
Eric, in general,
I never understand how to respond to that.
does that insult a veteran if I thank them for their service?
No, it's one of those things where how do you respond to that?
Yeah. Honestly, be honestly.
I've been banging away at this for, I guess, 19 years. Well, 18 years now.
Yeah.
I still don't know how to answer that.
Yeah.
Well, then what's your gut feeling when people say that? You want to punch them, right?
No.
Oh. Well, what's your gut feeling when somebody says, "Well, thank you for your service"?
I don't know. It just kind of feels off-putting.
Makes you feel awkward.
I got paid to do the job, man.
That's fair.
Well, working at McDonald's is getting paid to do a job. I think you're doing a little bit more than that when you serve in the military or police.
Well, it was
fireman.
contract work, if that makes any difference.
Still. I didn't do it. So
Nor did I.
there's a certain type.
Yeah, but I've never worked on a road crew for PennDOT either.
I haven't done that either. I have worked on a road crew, though, but not for PennDOT. Yeah. And I was in a chain gang for crimes committed down in Louisiana.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
No, I didn't. I really
It'll happen.
Rick's looking at me like,
Wow. Let's get out of this little studio.
This is a small studio. Is there a lock
it's
on that
small,
door?
so yes, it's locked, and I have the button right here, so you can't get out.
That's the funeral home and garbage truck.
We'll add you both to our menagerie of licensed guides.
I
Guide
see that.
buried under the shed. Okay, so seriously, let's get back to Kevin. So he thanks Eric there and for his work here on Addressing Gettysburg, which I thank him for that too as well. I did have a two-part question for the upcoming medical care episode. Here we go. Did the Confederates have an equivalent to Dr. Letterman, and was their battlefield triage system the same as the Federal Army? Go ahead. And by the way, we're just doing one of his two questions because we answered the other part.
The answer was, and I think we alluded to this earlier, Dr. Lafayette Guild was the medical director of the Army of Northern Virginia, and their triage system was largely the same. The Confederates suffered from sometimes fewer resources, fewer numbers of surgeons, but they had forward aid stations, they had division field hospitals, and they evacuated their men to general hospitals, just like the Union Army did.
Yeah, the Timbers Farm would be a forward aid station, we
For the
believe.
Confederates.
Black Horse Tavern
was a division field
hospital. Culps. One of the things that is cool for the surgeons, and I'll give the surgeons after everybody left here, one of the things Rick and I would like to see saved is Camp Letterman. I tell people all the time, the first Soldiers National Cemetery, in my opinion, on this battlefield is the cemetery at Camp Letterman, where the soldiers were placed in the graves as American soldiers.
Yeah.
You would see Massachusetts, Virginia, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, New York, Tennessee. They buried them as American soldiers. By this point in the war, Rick alluded to it. It was who was the best at doing the operation. The Hippocratic Oath, and I don't know if you want to tell them what that is. Every doctor takes it, says you treat a patient, you don't treat a political entity.
Right.
And which is kind of an interesting concept. But it's getting there 2 years into the war.
Yeah. It's getting where? To the point where you're starting to be like, well, he's a Reb, we'll worry about him later.
I don't know that it ever... People ask me when I drive by the seminary building. So the Union doctors worked on Confederate patients and vice versa, and yes, they did. I think it's very interesting, and I think this has been cited, when the soldiers said when they were shooting at each other, they were enemies, but when they were done shooting at each other, they were brothers. And I think I can credit the medical profession to pretty much being colorblind to, it was rare that anybody showed a preference about, I'm not taking care of you, because you got a gray uniform on, but I'm going to go to the...
Well, it's like in the Horse Soldiers, when John Wayne says, you took it out to the United States Army, and then William Holden says, I took a much older oath before that.
Yeah, true. Right.
And so that's what it is there. Okay, Ray Stow, he says, what was the typical recovery time for wounds? You see many stories of men being wounded several times during the Civil War and returning each time. My ancestor was shot in the left wrist on day 2 of Gettysburg, and he did not return to the field until May of 1864. He didn't lose his hand, but many men returned a few weeks or a couple of months later.
I think that while I would respond to that quite simply is how crippling was the wound. If the wound involves bones, it's going to take a lot longer to get better. If an infection sets in, as we mentioned, it did 4 out of 5 times, it's going to take longer to get better. And while Ray's ancestor may have still had his hand, I'd be surprised if he was out of commission that long if his hand worked very well.
Right.
But obviously well enough to come back to the front lines. But bony injury really prolongs recovery a long time.
And if it was his dominant hand.
Yeah.
If it's the hand that he uses. And the other thing that when I read that question, it's just now starting to come to light. Post-traumatic stress is not a new thing.
Oh my God,
to the war.
No.
So you know what? Some of these, we're seeing it. They called it soldier's heart, and of course they treated it with morphine.
Mercury.
Morphine. So I'm not sure some of that is in there. Some soldiers come back right away because they want to come back right away.
Yeah.
The adrenaline rush of being allowed to do this, and other ones, it's just, and that's kind of what we tend to forget, that these soldiers, you're never the same. And they weren't any different. It's just 159 years ago.
I think it's hard to imagine that, if someone you're lucky, you get shot in the wrist, like this is your ticket home, but then to find out, wow, I'm going to go back. Mm-hmm. People can't understand that mindset. And I think I can only imagine the rest, but I mean, when I was younger, I played in bands, and when you do something that is kind of like deep, like play music together and make it work and all that stuff, you bond. And if you really hit it off and you like playing together and all that stuff, then it's going to be harder when you're not around each other anymore. If you break up and everything and you miss it. So it's kind of like, I remember one time I was with this band, then it ended and I started with another band, and it took me a while to get to like being with this band because I missed playing with the other guys. And so, it could sort of be a similar version of that where it's just like, I just got to get back to my boys. Like,
peer pressure, take the university grays. Everybody else is going to come back and say we were here and I had a flesh wound. And so all that stuff, I tell people all the time, you know exactly what the soldiers are feeling like. You lived through it.
Yeah.
Peer pressure, what girl likes me, what girl doesn't like me, Dear John letters.
It's just a hyper situation. Right. Like everything is more intense.
Right.
And there are increasingly good works now that examine PTSD and the Civil War. There's a great book, I didn't bring it with me, called Shook Over Hell.
Yeah, I just got that.
It's excellent.
Is it?
And it compares PTSD in the Civil War versus Vietnam.
Yeah.
I thought it was, Dean is the last name of the author. I don't remember his first name, but
Howard Dean.
But there
What a way to be remembered.
Everybody does.
there are increasingly good works on the psychological aspects of what these men went through and what they're missing when they're. I think that's what you were saying, Matt, is what they were missing by not being part of that very intense experience.
Yeah.
And that's you've been taught your whole life, thou shalt not kill, don't fight with your brother. What do you want to do? Kill him. And then here you're allowed to do it. Yeah. And they say that's a big confrontation for people to come over. So that hasn't changed.
All right, Roy Mead, he wants to know. He says, "Hi, Matt and Eric. My question is, what kind of pandemics did they have during the Civil War? Was there a bunch of them or just a few that were the cause for concern? And how were they treated?"
Well, if you were a new soldier coming in from the west, if you were coming from Ohio, farm country, first thing you'd be done on both armies, you'd be put into what they called a quarantine pen with soldiers from the big cities. And the plan was get your chicken pox, get your measles, get your cowpox, get your smallpox, get your flus, get your pneumonias, and die here. Don't die out there.
Right. And one of the reasons that the average regiment at Gettysburg is 300 to 350 and not fully recruited 1,000 is because of things like Fran said, measles and mumps, and the men from the West hadn't been exposed to these diseases. Now, part of this question,
Go ahead. I got
part of this question is definition. What we're really talking about are epidemics, contagious diseases that affect large bodies of people in a limited location.
Right, a pandemic is everywhere.
Around the world. Yeah, so we're quibbling over words, but epidemics were a big problem and were responsible for a big part of those 2/3 of the deaths of soldiers in the Civil War. Things that you don't even think about.
Right. Well, was it the 20th Maine? Weren't they new to service in the summer of '62?
I think that's right. Yeah.
They were at Antietam, but they weren't in it.
Right.
They were in Fredericksburg. Mm-hmm. They missed out on Chancellorsville because of a smallpox, right?
I believe that's right. Yeah.
Right. And so in less than a year's time, by the time they get to Gettysburg, they're around 400, slightly under 400.
Something like that, yeah.
But that's not all battle deaths or wounding. No, it's disease.
And it's very interesting and very apropos to where we are in 2021. Vaccinations were a big thing in the Civil War,
right?
Especially smallpox vaccinations, and they would literally take some of the crust from your pox and then put it into another soldier's little cut that you would get the virus.
Is that why?
That's why you have the scar. Yeah.
Yeah. So even in the 20th century, people that got, because I remember all the older people had that scar. You have one too?
Yeah, I have one.
Okay.
Yeah, I do too.
And you do too?
Yeah. Service probably.
Yeah.
Probably from, because I'm saying I don't have.
But that wasn't a live virus. It was a
attenuated.
Attenuated virus.
But why that big scar though?
Because it would cause a scab.
To put the injector had like 8 little needles.
Oh, it wasn't okay. It wasn't one needle. It was like the TB
scratch.
test.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Scabs and kind of festers. It's gross.
But these soldiers are terrible. They've got scurvy. They have they're all malnourished.
Yeah.
Scurvy I've never seen, but that makes bleeding problems.
Vitamin C deficiency.
Yeah, and night blindness and all this stuff.
Which is a vitamin A deficiency.
Yeah. You don't even.
What is night blindness?
Night blindness, when you go to sleep at night, if you turn the lights off in your bedroom, notice how you can't see, and then suddenly you can start to see all types of gray and black in the bedroom. Shadows of color. That's a chemical in your eye called rhodopsin, made of vitamin A. And there's sensors in your eyes that are just sensing different shades of gray. So, and then in the morning when the light turns on, you know how you make your eyes squint because it hurts? That's because light blows that rhodopsin out, so now you can see colors. So at night, that's why, well, first of all, they don't like to fight at night because it's dark.
It's dark.
But secondly, they all have a fair amount of night blindness, and the best description I had is wear your sunglasses at night and then cup your hands in front of your eyes.
Oh.
That's night blindness.
Oh.
And it was a common problem. One of the best books, and it's in front of you, Matt, if you hold it up. This is the one on top, right there. Dr. Alfred J. Bollett. That's the book I recommend about general education about Civil War medicine.
Ditto that.
And he takes a long, hard look at things like vitamin A deficiency, follows soldiers through the Atlanta campaign where their nutritional Union soldiers aren't getting good nutrition, and they get clearly have poor vision at the end.
Open right to night blindness.
There you go. There you go. So, but I highly recommend that book if you're looking for one book overview of medical care in the Civil War. Yeah. Surgery, yes, but a lot of medical stuff.
Okay, good. Because I was going to ask you what's like and this would be the one that.
But he talks a lot about nutritional diseases.
So our friend Deb Novotny tells a story, and I was talking with her on one of the programs, and she said, the Confederates asked for 60 barrels of onions when they came into Gettysburg. Yeah. And I said, Deb, what were they going to do? Make cheesesteaks? What's going on here? And you got to love it when you're a newer guide and the seasoned guide looks at you and says, Fran, onions is the best way to carry vitamin A and vitamin C, and then you kind of hit your head. But that's what they wanted.
Yeah, of course. All right, Tim Dolan, he says, I was looking at some notes and records on the deaths of volunteers and noticed that some soldiers would have listed cause of death. Oh, wait a sec. I'm sorry. I can't read other people's sentence structures. And I noticed that some soldiers would have a listed cause of death as gunshot wound to the abdomen. Others in the same unit from the same battle and the same surgeon annotated would have listed gunshot wound to the bowels. What was the difference between the two conditions? Penetration of the digestive tract. That would be my uneducated guess, is that abdomen is from the waist up, bowels is from the waistline down.
Well, I think...
Well, between that and the pubic bone.
Every gunshot wound to the bowels is a gunshot wound to the abdomen. Because the digestive system is all within your abdomen. It's possible to get shot in the abdomen or around the abdomen and not have it go through your bowels.
Gotcha.
Fran and I do a tour where we follow 4 wounded soldiers from the 148th PA off of this battlefield in their triage. One of those victims was supposedly shot in the liver. And Fran and I can tell you, if you're shot in the liver, you're going to be dead within minutes. And this guy didn't die until September after his wound on July 2nd.
Now, the liver regenerates itself or rejuvenates itself, doesn't it?
It can to a certain degree, and it's not...
But not when you get shot through it.
No, it's so full of blood vessels, you're going to bleed to death.
Done.
So we kind of tongue-in-cheek say this guy was shot around the liver. He probably died of an infection from a relatively minor wound in or around the abdominal cavity, but if you get shot in the abdomen and it doesn't go through your bowel, it's still a pretty devastating injury, but it's a death sentence if you get shot through the digestive system as
Tim
asked.
Once again, your body has a defense mechanism over your gut called the omentum. It looks like an apron of fat. And on me, it's pretty...
Some of us have bigger omentums than
others. If you've ever heard of people who have...
I'm full of omentum.
Yeah, me
You're
too.
in good company.
But when your bowel ruptures from a tick, or if you even have an appendix ruptures, this omentum fat kind of flows into that area and seals it off.
Really?
So some of those soldiers can survive if the wound was, I don't know, not that bad, and they'll be sick as hell. But like I said, your body's trying to save itself, so that omentum apron kind of seals off areas.
The question I always ask is, how did anyone survive the Civil War? And I guess you kind of answered it there, is that the body is very resilient, and it will find a way, if it can, to save you.
But we have to keep our perspective. When you look at injuries and wounds, if you're shot in the abdomen, there's only a 2% survival rate with that.
Sure.
It's the most devastating part of the body. That and the brain are you're not going to recover from. You've got a 1/3 chance to survive being shot in the chest. If it doesn't hit anything important, which a third of the time it doesn't. If it doesn't hit a blood vessel, if it doesn't cause so much bleeding in your lung that you get Jackson's pneumonia or ARDS. It's a more survivable wound than being shot in the abdomen.
All right. Okay. All right. Kyle Reynolds says, I am extremely excited that Fran and Rick are on the show. Civil War medicine is one of my favorite topics. Having done 2 combat deployments to Afghanistan as a Navy corpsman, or as our recent President Obama would call it, corpsman. It is interesting to see the changes that have taken place over the past 160 years. I actually have a few questions. All right, well, we're going to try to get them in as much as we can here, but we're running low on time. All right, I imagine that Civil War surgeons did not have plasma volume expanders, i.e. Hextend, Hespan, etc. But did they use anything at the time that they thought increased blood/plasma volume for patients suffering from massive blood loss? Before you answer that, just quickly define blood and define plasma. What's the difference?
So you talked about corpuscles. Blood cells are corpuscles. They float in a liquid called plasma.
Okay.
And plasma is like an IV fluid you can give them. 2 recorded blood transfusions in the Civil War in that book tome. First, they took, I think, 10 ounces from a stout German. I'm just reporting what it said.
A stout German.
And they injected it into a soldier's vein, so that they had to do a cut down. They had a syringe called a gutta-percha syringe that was just a plunger, and the soldier got better. Well, geez, if that works, we got to try it again. So they have another soldier. They take 12 ounces from another stout German, and they inject it, and the patient immediately dies. So, yes, we have 2 known, documented chances of trying to do that. They just don't have a way of giving these plasma extenders.
Is this did he die? Is this a blood type thing? Or
a transfusion reaction. We think the first one, they were just damn lucky they got the right type blood, or he was the universal recipient and the other one was the universal donor.
Yeah.
But twice they said, no, do we have any stout Italians or stout?
Yeah, we didn't know anything about blood types.
How about any drunk Irish? We got any drunk Irish?
As opposed to stout German.
Yeah, stout German. So.
That may be redundant.
Yeah.
Drunk Irish.
This guy's a teetotaler, so maybe we need some drunk Irish blood.
Yeah. Beastily drunk. Give me a beastily drunk Irishman.
Okay, so go ahead. What was the answer for this?
I was just going to say, we didn't know anything about blood types till 1910.
Right.
Another example of an advance that was too far ahead of it.
And they didn't have anything to, that's the problem. Whether it was diarrhea or bleeding, there's no way to get fluid back into you.
Yeah.
No way to get fluid. The only way they knew to do it was orally.
Yeah. Orally. And then if the problem's in the gut, that's not going to help you because it's just going to go right out.
That's right.
Yeah.
Okay. If you haven't done so already, would you discuss the abundant use of mercurial treatments for a wide array of illnesses and conditions, as well as the abuse and addiction of morphine by wounded soldiers? We already did the mercurial stuff. How about, that's one thing we didn't get into, though, is morphine and its addictive properties and soldiers after.
It was like Skittles.
Yeah.
How so?
Everybody could get it.
Oh,
Your kid was teething. Oh, here, give him some morphine.
Yeah.
It was bad.
You could just get it over the counter.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And laudanum, which we read about.
Which is morphine and alcohol?
Yep.
Yeah.
Opium and alcohol.
Yeah.
Because
morphine is synthetic opium.
Right.
It mixes well in the alcohol and it gets into your bloodstream faster.
Yeah.
I shouldn't have told people that.
Correct me if I'm wrong. There wasn't even a schedule of drugs until, what, like 1920?
Probably. Yeah.
So every surgeon or every doctor was just kind of like doing his own
whatever
thing?
the hell you want.
And
you can buy whatever you want.
There was no USP, so you might get some morphine that's really strong.
You can find ads in magazines of the time that if your child is teething and unhappy, you can give them this remedy that has opium in it.
Coke was a cough syrup. Was cough syrup with cocaine.
Yeah.
And there was a very dark period of substance abuse in the late 1800s in our country because people had no understanding of this. Cocaine ran rampant. Opium was being widely used, and it really, as Eric pointed to, the whole idea of controlled substances came out of that period. And interestingly, it also led to the temperance movement in the early 20s because alcohol, of course, was just as bad as those other awful.
And some of the post-traumatic stress following the Civil War is morphine going on and coming off and getting away from it, not to mention all the other vices, alcohol, tobacco, chewing tobacco,
Sounds like a mess. But, they did call that the good old days.
That's right.
Beth and Emily Bonacci, they say, were the vast majority of operations during the war amputations? This is a lightning round here. She's got some quick ones. So, were the vast majority of operations amputations?
Yes, they were, because you couldn't really do abdominal or brain surgery very effectively.
Good point. Of those who have a limb amputated, what was the survival rate?
Depends on where the amputation was done. The closer the limb was removed from the trunk, the higher was the death rate. So if you have your foot taken off, there's probably an 85 to 90% survival rate with that. If you have John Bell Hood's Chickamauga injury and you end up with a very high above knee amputation, there's an 80% mortality rate.
Why is that?
Because it's bigger tissue, the blood vessels are bigger, the infections are more significant. And, but the overall survival rate, if you look at all amputations, was 75%. It was better than people think.
Yeah, that is better than I thought.
Yeah.
Okay.
But it depended on the level.
What was the worst injury where the person survived when the doctors thought it was fatal during the battle? I'm going to say Chamberlain.
God love his wife.
I mean, it's hard to know the answer to this because, we're talking at Gettysburg? Are we talking about in the war? What was the worst injury?
Well,
so the first one that came to mind was Chamberlain for me.
Chamberlain's injury, which he sustained at Petersburg, was...
I wasn't saying he sustained it here.
He was shot through the urethra.
Yes.
Which is the little tube that connects your bladder to your penis.
It gets clap.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, he basically gets traumatic clap, and the urine won't come out the way it's supposed to. It comes out through what are called fistulas in various locations down there.
Fistulas are what?
Openings to the outside of the body that aren't supposed to be there.
So
urine came out of a hole up in his groin.
Oh, why did I ask this question?
You brought it up.
You asked.
And he had...
So the infection makes a track to get out, and then urine comes out.
He's a great example of a wounded veteran who looked fine from the outside, but he was decimated in areas that you couldn't see.
That's why when I see those pictures of him as an old man riding a horse in some parade, I'm like, how does he do that? Because that plagued him the rest of his life, that injury, right?
And I think it plagued his marriage.
And well, I would imagine so, unless she was frigid. Well, and that's the other thing. He had to have stunk. I mean,
but it isn't the age of hygiene in general.
Yeah, that's true.
So.
But now, wait, one more question about this. Is it true that they used a glass tube to complete his urethra or something like that?
They did in an effort to
probe it.
To probe it.
And they tried to repair it. What they would do, they'd put the catheter in, and that would be the glass tube or metal, and then they would close up the fistula. Well, as soon as you take the catheter out, the urine goes the other way and comes back out.
Good God.
I do want to answer.
Please. Yes.
I did find the worst injury that I found in the Civil War, and it actually happened at the Battle of Cedar Mountain.
Okay. Worse than getting shot in the penis.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Major Snowden Andrews, who was an artillery commander in Ewell's Corps, he actually was Joseph Latimer's boss at one point. At the Battle of Cedar Mountain, Snowden Andrews is on his horse when a piece of shrapnel goes through his arm and rips the right side of his abdomen open. He falls backwards, and it saves his bowels from coming out of the wound, but eventually they do. 3 doctors walk by him and say, "You can't possibly survive." 2 brothers from Georgia who are surgeons finally take him off the battlefield, wash off his bowel, stuff it back in there, and sew up his abdomen. Now he needs a silver plate to hold his guts in for the rest of the war and hold his abdominal wall together. But the guy survives this wound and lives till 1903.
Wow.
Snowden Andrews.
That's pretty good. So just 2 brothers, they weren't even surgeons?
No, they were surgeons.
Oh, they were surgeons.
And his intestines were covered with dirt. And one of the quotes, and this is written up in Bob Crick's book on Cedar Mountain, one of the brothers looks at the other brother and because Andrews says to the surgeons, "I had a hound dog that was chasing a fox and ripped his bowels open, and we put it back in, and he lived. I can be better than a hound dog." and the 2 brothers look at each other and go, "He's got a lot of grit in him," meaning literally the dirt on his bowel. Yeah. But it's an incredible story, and
That is pretty good. There was one that I remember reading about at Chancellorsville, I think, and they were, I can't remember if it was, well, it had to be, I don't remember, I think it was Confederates. I don't remember who it was. But they were attacking a battery. And the battery, all the guns are loaded with double canister, and within like 40 yards or whatever, they just all let go. And the guy who's writing it was one of the few to remain standing.
Oh, really?
And he says, when the dust and smoke started to clear, I could see just a few of my comrades scattered about, standing there kind of in a daze. And so this one kid is just standing there. So he goes over to him, and as he nears, he could see that his entire left arm has been ripped off, and his heartbeat, he can actually see his heart because everything is just ripped. And then the kid was in shock because he was still standing there. And as soon as the guy touched him and like said, hey, why don't you come sit down? He just collapsed.
And he died.
Adrenaline.
I would assume that he died.
Adrenaline.
Yeah. It's amazing that.
Well, there's the account here of John Chase over in Stevens Battery.
Yeah.
He's
He made
put in
money.
a wagon to be buried, and 2 days afterwards, and he kind of moans, and they look at him and say, "Oh, he's not quite dead yet."
Yeah.
And what's he got? 48 wounds, loses an arm, loses an eye.
And I used William Furlong of the 153rd Pennsylvania, shot on the first day out on around Barlow's Knoll. Head wound, massive head wound. He's dead. They let him in the field. He wakes up. Yeah.
Take him to the Spangler farm.
He wakes up. I'm not dead. They take him to the Spangler farm, and they look at the wound, and he doesn't seem to be breathing. Oh, he's dead. They lay him under the farm. Rain comes. Water starts hitting his face and head, starts to wash out his wound, and he wakes up. So Rick and I say all the time, it's hard to tell.
Never know.
How do you have a general get a bullet go through his eye?
Well,
his
there's
brain?
that fellow from Illinois that everybody passes that photo around, and everybody has seen it. He's got a hole dead center of his forehead.
Yep.
And he lived until he was like late 80s.
Yeah.
And at some point in like the 1890s, a chunk of the mini ball fell out of his head.
Yeah, I know. That's so
I've
weird.
been looking for that.
Help me.
Oh, there it is.
Elcom Sherrill?
Look at that.
Eliakim Sherrill gets wounded before Gettysburg, and he's trying to come back, and he's got this. The wound was in his face, and he's trying to get back, and he's got this painful knob in the roof of his mouth, and it gets bad and worse, and finally some doc says, well, why don't you let me open that up and let it drain? And when he opens it up, one of the teeth from when he was shot is in his mouth, and because there's blood vessels up there, the tooth is growing. So we sit all the time when people
can't
say,
make this stuff up.
Wow.
Can't make this stuff up.
That's creepy. Okay, Charles Fuller says, my ancestor's military records show he fought with the Danville Artillery with his first battle at Second Manassas and final battle at Gettysburg. Gettysburg appears to have been his last battle, as records place him in a Charlottesville infirmary in December of 63, where he was discharged, no pun intended, shortly thereafter due to chronic diarrhea. I am curious as to how common chronic diarrhea was, and if possible, I would like to know what factors could make it become chronic as opposed to temporary.
Yeah, I think we touched on that earlier.
Well, we did certainly swim in the diarrhea pool.
We
did longer than we probably wanted to.
But
nonetheless.
This is a good one, though, because he's talking about chronic versus temporary.
Again, it's the changes that happen in the lining of the intestine from repetitive bouts of acute diarrhea. Eventually, the lining of the intestine doesn't work, and you don't absorb enough nutritional material, and you end up dying of malnutrition because you can't get it.
And it still exists today. Irritable bowel syndrome. What's the other one that they talk about?
Malabsorption syndrome.
Malabsorption syndrome.
That's what people with gluten sensitivity have to
Absolutely.
Okay.
So it's still out there.
Okay. All right. Mike Kearns wants to know, how did dying of disease versus dying in combat affect the ability of a widow and or child to collect on a deceased soldier's pension? Or did it? Eric, you're the pension expert on the show here.
That's a relief because we don't know.
Short answer, it didn't.
All right.
So this is an act that was passed by Congress February 28, 1883. And I'm just going to read a real quick part of it. If any person has died since March 4th, 1861, or hereafter dies by reason of any wound, injury, or disease, which under the conditions and limitations of previous sections would have entitled him to an invalid pension had he been disabled, his widow or if there be no widow, or in the case of her death without payment to her of any part of the pension hereinafter mentioned, his child or children under 16 years of age shall be entitled to receive the same pension as the husband or father would have been entitled to had he been totally disabled, to commence from the death of the husband or father, to continue to the widow during her widowhood, and to his child or children, blah, 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 blah. The only thing that really affects that is you have to prove that you were married. You have to prove that your spouse
Daddy was your daddy?
would have been entitled to a pension, right, under the terms and conditions of all the other pension laws. And you have to prove that you haven't been remarried. Right, the spouse had to have been your primary means of support. Right, if you get remarried at some point, and I went through this with one of my ancestors. She married 3 times, all 3 times to, well, the first one, her husband was killed here at Gettysburg. She applied for a widow's pension in '63. She continued on that widow's pension until she remarried in the 1870s. He died. Then she continued on another widow's pension until she remarried again. And then
the second husband was another military guy?
All 3 of her husbands were.
She had a
girl.
type.
Yeah.
Sounds like a Columbo episode.
Got around a bit. But,
wait a minute, man.
That's
Were they all military?
in terms of like,
Appears to me that
did dying of disease affect? No, absolutely not. As
Dead
long
is
as
dead.
it was done within service.
That's the point. As long as you were in service to the country, you got it. Didn't matter how you died. Okay. All right. Martin Husk. I know this email for a medical Ask a Guide segment puts me in the realm of 6 questions length, but here it goes.
I just want to go on the record as saying I'm disappointed we don't have questions from 6 questions length.
Well, you can tell him that because I think he's coming by for the 3 o'clock, and we're at 2 o'clock now, so he might be coming early.
Yeah.
So if he comes by, just let him know.
I will.
I'm also disappointed. Explain. Okay. No, sorry. Movies often portray Civil War surgery as multiple people holding down. We did that one too.
Right.
We kind of touched on a lot of these. Let's see. How often were regimental surgeons performing surgeries other than those associated with combat? That's a good one. So, yeah. Like you just go to like you're going to your doctor in normal life, for regular ailments.
I don't think anybody would have been fixing hernias. I don't know, A, did they know how? And B, unless you were in deep trouble because your hernia was so bad. But probably you'd be discharged and sent back home for a civilian physician. But there are things that surgeons would do when the Army was in camp, like we talked about.
Well, they have sick call every day.
Right.
And, for this is where we talked about the guys that fall and just break a wrist.
Right.
Cut their foot off with an axe accidentally.
Dental work. A lot of the hospital stewards and the surgeons did dental work as well. So.
Yeah.
All right. Let's see. Okay, we talked about all those. Okay, well, I think we got all of Martin's questions in there. I just wanted to make sure you had a lot of them. All right, Kevin O'Brien at Saratoga. Benedict Arnold's badly broken leg was set and saved, but it seems that rarely, if ever, it happened during the Civil War. Why? When did medicine evolve enough to begin to reduce amputations? Is he not putting things together correctly there?
I think the question is, and I don't know much, if anything, about Benedict. In fact, I know nothing about Benedict Arnold's injury at Saratoga. I looked up something, and I wasn't sure if it was a gunshot wound or he was injured when his horse fell. And there could be a big difference there.
Right.
If he if he had a compound or open fracture from the horse falling on him, that again, like we talked about, is different than a gunshot wound and the severe damage that goes along with that. And they could have set it and put it in a splint, and it didn't get infected, and the bone healed, and he went on to be a traitor. But the leg survived.
Was it a traitor?
He was. As far as when did we get better at not doing amputations, I think when rudimentary things like plates and screws and wire, Fran sent me an account of a Civil War surgeon, not on the battlefield, but at a general hospital, who wired a femur together to try to get it to heal. So people were thinking about it, but it was all outer envelope stuff.
Yeah, like it was experimental at this point, right? Like you were trying things out. Like
and I would think, too, we said the documentation in medicine, Rick and I'll tell you, if it's not documented, it wasn't done. We know that stuff has to be happening. I just don't think they documented that Joe Smith fell off a horse and I said his shoulder today.
I guess one of the answers to that is, quite honestly, that it wasn't until World War II and slightly after that the explosion of, no pun intended, but the advancements of putting plates, screws, rods, all the what we call internal fixation stuff in fracture work occurred. So, and a lot of that has evolved in the 33 years that I was in practice.
And I would also tell you, it's not meatball surgery either. When Rick talks about the wounded soldier getting to a Spangler farm, the operators kind of have a conference. Yeah. Almost a little bit like you see on the TV show MASH, where they get around and say, okay, we need to retry. You're first, you're second, you're third. Joe, you do this. I'm going to be doing, and it wasn't cut. It wasn't remove. It was, what can we do? And we don't have a lot of good records on that discussion at the Spangler barn of who got operated on, who didn't.
Right, sure.
I don't think rank had much to do with it, although I'm sure if Robert E. Lee got hurt, there'd be 6 people rendering an opinion as opposed to one guy. Yeah, John Bell Hood's injury, there were 4 different doctors that looked at that before they decided what to do.
All right. Donnie Copper, this is our helicopter EMT hero of the sky. We like to call him Donnie Copper, hero of the sky. He has a couple questions. One, I've heard that urinary catheters were used during the Civil War. How prevalent were they? How often were they used? What were they made of? I knew a guy who used to do a medical impression over in front of the Wax Museum. Years ago, like 10 or more. And his fascination was Civil War urology. And he had these probes and catheters and all these weird things that would go up there. And the ones that he had, at least, were made of metal. Mm-hmm. And some of them were quite frightening. And then years later, I was watching an episode of Deadwood. You ever watch that show? Deadwood. No? It was on HBO. It was really good. It was about, it was a Western. But anyway, one of the main characters, Al, has a kidney stone. And he's having trouble passing it. And it's this big, huge ordeal through the whole episode. And finally, the scene comes where the town's doctor comes in. And he takes one of these things. And he shoves it up there. And you could actually hear it clinking on the gleat. Is that what it's called? What do they call it?
Well, they tip them sometimes with metal, sometimes with ceramic. And a good surgeon would know the difference between bone and metal and stuff.
From the sound.
From the sound and the feel.
It's tactile.
Yeah. And then so there was this whole big thing, but they spared no detail audio wise. Visually, they didn't show anything, but you could hear things, and then you could hear it. Finally, I guess he moves it aside so that the urine can come out and the relief and all that other stuff. I mean, it looks like a nightmare, but anyway. But what it was what are the ansers to?
I was going to say, first of all, for Hero from the Sky. Did you notice that the field hospitals are very close to the wounded? And your friend Donnie would talk about the one golden hour. He does it in a helicopter. Mm-hmm. They did it by being close. So first of all, Donnie, next time you get up in your helicopter, you would be near the front line. You'd be at the Hummelbaugh farm because you got to get them treated fast in that first hour. Kidney stones. I've never had one, knock on wood.
They're not fun.
But I've had people that I've given 10 milligrams of morphine to, and they'll say, thank you. It went from excruciating to unbearable. Okay? And they're painful, and they did do that stuff.
Yeah.
Well, and even nowadays, I'm not a urologist. I made that, I took that fork in the road a long time ago. That was right beyond gynecology. And but a lot of the catheters are still pretty stiff. I mean,
Yeah.
it's hard to sometimes get it all the way up into the bladder, especially in older men whose prostate glands get bigger.
Everything's falling apart.
And sometimes you got to shove kind of hard. So it can't be soft rubber. So they did use them, but
we get cameras up there now. We run lasers up and smash stones around. We push them through, and there's some.
It's amazing all the things that could be shoved up the penis and the anus.
Yeah,
you know, you wouldn't think, but a lot of stuff. And doctors seem to like to really just shove everything they can up there.
Doctors.
Oh, okay.
My closest thing to a urologist was watching the urine come out and making sure it was half of your weight, so they knew you were getting enough fluid.
Did surgeons have any way of supporting a patient's respiratory drive if they quit breathing?
I'm going to let you do this.
So I did a little research on ventilation and ventilators. It's a big talk now with COVID going on. True ventilation's not. Ventilators don't exist in the Civil War, and it was a part due to the ignorance of what makes you stay alive.
Does CPR exist?
Well, we're going to talk about that. They don't understand the relationship between the heart, lungs, and oxygen and the 4-minute time span till your brain dies. And they really thought that death was due to lack of not being stimulated. So they did a whole bunch of stuff. They would roll people over barrels, throw them on trotting horses.
Wait, what?
Flagellate them, hit them with
beat 'em?
Hang them upside down, cool them with ice.
Are
you trying to help them or torture them?
They're trying to help them.
Alcohol was a stimulus. If you were unconscious, they'd give you alcohol to stimulate you. The Marshall Hall method is CPR. Is used. I have a picture of it somewhere in here. They would literally roll you from side to side. And it would, think about it, if you're laying on your back and I'm rolling you over, you push air in and out of the lungs.
Yeah.
Probably the weirdest one was fumigation. And Rick, I didn't put it together until you told me, but they would put smoke up your rectum to stimulate you. So when we came in, what did you tell me?
Don't blow smoke up my ass.
We think that's where I would agree.
That's where it came from. Yeah.
And then the first ventilators, they would put you in a box, and they would suck all the air out, and I'll give you the pictures. You can show them. The first one was used with an air pump. So imagine how long it would take to make you breathe by putting you in a sauna and pulling the air out to make you breathe. That's kind of how it worked. That didn't work well. That's a precursor to the iron lung from the polio days. That would come through. But probably one of the best one, and this is the pneumatic chamber, patented by William Schwarke in Germany in 1926. You got to take a hard look at this picture because it's the same thing. The box makes the pressure, but who makes the pressure?
You do.
You do.
That's silly.
You have to pull that in and out to keep breathing. Now, as time has come on, we've come up with ventilators, and these work different. We put a tube down into your throat, seal off your trachea. Now, in the Civil War, we did do trachs. We would cut into your windpipe to let you breathe, tracheostomy, and put a catheter down.
What's the difference between a tracheostomy and a tracheotomy?
A tracheostomy is temporary, tracheotomy is permanent.
So like a throat cancer person would have a tracheotomy.
And now we have a machine that will push air in, and a ventilator. Now, that was the big thing with COVID-19. That's what
kills people.
That's what Jackson needed.
Yeah.
Because through that ventilator, that's how I can give anesthetics. I still use modern ethers to keep you asleep. We can push and hold pressure in your lungs. So I tell people, take a deep breath. Don't let it all the way out. We have ventilators that can do that. But as we've gotten better with ventilators, we also know they create problems. You can't stay on them
we learned that.
forever. Yeah. Right. So they don't have that type of support, and it's not that they're dumb or crazy or stupid. It's the best. The best evidence that we had, because rolling somebody back and forth, by God, some of them start breathing. You know.
What, if anything, Donnie wants to know, was known about pneumothoraces? Pneumothoraces, or collapsed lungs, and how to treat them? Good question. I would imagine that happens a lot, collapsed lungs in a rough and tumble military setting.
Right. Anytime you're shot in the chest, it's going to lead to a pneumothorax because your lung cavity has a negative pressure in it. Right. That's what allows your lungs to expand. I mentioned earlier that being shot in the chest had a 2/3 mortality, but a 1/3 chance you could live. That would presume that the pneumothorax it was because would be adequately treated. Most of the time, they would put a dressing on there, but just realize air was going to go back and forth, and eventually it would seal itself. There was an effort to put a sealed dressing on right away, but like anything that you put on from a gunshot wound right away, if it doesn't allow fluid to come out, it's going to lead to infection.
Yeah.
And that experiment was stopped fairly quickly. So I don't know that they really understood enough to put chest tubes in to help inflate lungs. I think it probably just happened happenstance.
And if you think about your lungs, there's 5 lobes if you think of a left and a right lung. If your left lobe is collapsed and air is leaking in there, it has no way to get up, it's going to push everything over
to the ones that
pressurizes the sides. And what's in between there? Your heart. And that's what kills you. So they probably just, by experimentation, said, hey, you know what? We can't get this one sealed, but this guy's doing better. Rick's correct in the fact that if that bullet goes through your chest and it doesn't hit any of the great vessels of your heart, there's not much in there.
No,
Air.
Yeah.
And you can survive some of that. But the treatment of pneumothorax is just getting there. But I think, remember, these weapons are high weight, low velocity. They don't make a nice little bullet hole.
Yeah.
They make a cut.
What pneumo? So pneumonia.
Pneumo means air. Thorax means air in the chest.
Okay. So then pneumonia would be
fluid in the air enclosed organ, the lung.
Okay.
Pneumo
gotcha.
is lung
fluid where air should be.
Yes.
Yeah. Wonderful. All right. And then finally, Bill Etzkorn says, did Sickles losing his leg help or hinder removing his head from his ass?
On behalf of Rick and I, we are not going to interfere with Jim Hessler.
No, I would refer this to Jim Hessler, but I would, as a highly trained orthopedic surgeon, I would add this comment. I think with only one leg, it would be harder to pull his head out of his ass than if I'd had 2.
You lose that leverage that the other leg gives you.
But let's be interestingly about that. Rick might be the first one that has convinced me that when you see Sickles' leg, you're not seeing all of it.
No.
Rick, tell them where you think Sickles' wound is. It's kind of an interesting...
When you read the accounts of his wounding, and it's in Jim's book, Sickles reaches inside of his boot and pulls his hand out and it's covered with blood.
Right.
We see the specimen from the knee down, and there's a big hole in the middle of his tibia.
Yeah.
But I think he also had an injury above the knee, and they took the leg off through that injury, because when you look at pictures of Sickles...
Through the wound.
He's an above-knee amputee.
Yeah.
You also never see him with an artificial limb. I don't know that he ever wore an artificial limb.
Okay.
But I think they took it off.
Too heavy for if it's cut up high, you mean?
No, the prosthesis.
He may have never been comfortable in it. Although knowing Dan Sickles, he might have preferred to not wear a limb.
I would think
so people could look at him and say,
pay attention.
Yeah, waving the bloody rag.
Yeah.
But I think that it's very likely that his injury was at 2 levels, and because he is not an amputee through the knee joint. As somebody who lived in that area, I can tell you that his amputation is through the middle of the femur, but that's not what the specimen is. It's only from the knee joint down.
And just to tell you, what's the other disease that he has?
Only an orthopedic surgeon would care about this. There's a common teenage knee disorder called Osgood-Schlatters disease.
I've heard of that.
Yeah. I can tell you by looking at Dan Sickles' specimen, he had Osgood-Schlatters disease when he was a teenager. So
really?
If he ever played basketball, it would have hurt to jump. And the aforementioned fellow friend and guide, Jim Hessler, also had Osgood-Schlatters disease.
So that's why he likes Sickles. They're brothers in suffering.
Soulmates.
And they're
soulmates and Osgood-Schlatters.
Thank
you, Jim.
Jim and Rick and I don't agree on the fact. I kind of think he had a amputation quickly at the Trossel farm, and then his surgery was to clean it up when he got to the...
He had an operation at the Sheeler house over by the outlets. But
so he could put his champagne in the well.
Yeah, but he may have had a Bayard Wilkerson type of injury at the scene, and it's not real clear, and Jim will tell you this, it's not real clear where the amputation was done.
Is the account of his wounding very detailed?
Yeah. And
It
it's
is.
bicycles himself.
It's bicycles. So, but do we know, was it a cannonball or was it a piece of shrapnel? And was he was on his horse, right?
Right.
So was the horse wounded too?
The horse was not injured.
So this was a glancing blow? Like, how did this work?
He was astride the horse, and the ball, it's my understanding, the solid shot came bouncing over the ridges and hit him full on in the right leg without injuring the horse.
And what we don't understand,
Amazing.
there's two wounds. If you're right, there's a femoral wound. Did the ball roll down? And that's when Jim Hessler, we go out, we sit and say, okay, buddy. But we think as angulated as that leg would have been,
Yeah.
it may have been already tore off. They had to throw a tourniquet on,
Yeah.
and they probably said, give me a knife. We're just going to get it. You know, so, but
Maybe.
Do you believe that he was smoking a cigar as he was carried off?
I'd like to. It's such a good story,
Yeah,
but I
it's a
think
great story.
Jim's work has put it in doubt.
yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
And as an anesthesia, he should know you're NPO at midnight. No
You're not
smoking,
supposed
no
to smoke
chewing
either,
gum.
drink.
I'd have just given him hell.
this is what I'm saying. Well, I mean, wouldn't the nicotine raise his heartbeat, which would make him bleed?
And make the blood vessels spasm. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Once again, he'd be doing something he shouldn't be doing.
Yeah.
All right, so some of the books that you brought along with you that you recommend is this one here, Civil War Medicine, by who is this by?
Dr. Alfred J. Bollett.
Yes, okay. You say the author says, well, I know this one here because
Right.
he's a buddy of ours.
Right.
Ron Kirkwood, Too Much for Human Endurance. You've heard us talk about this for months now, ladies and gentlemen. If you haven't gotten this already, man, you are late to the party,
Well, we
and
did
I'm never inviting you to
We
any of
did a
mine.
program off of that. And we said, Ron, give us some of the wounds that you identified that you can't believe they survived. And we did a program on it.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah,
That's a good idea. This one here, I've heard of, and I have not gotten it yet, though. Bullets and Bandages.
It's the most complete listing of division field hospitals and field aid stations, and directly builds on the book you're going to show last, Matt. It's written by a friend of ours from Johnstown, actually, Jim Gindelsberger. It's an excellent book.
That's why I waited for you to say the name, because I wasn't sure how to say it here. And, I misread the back of it here. But this is The Avasty of Misery.
Yep.
And, of course, everybody knows this book.
Yeah,
if
that's
you don't.
an earlier publication. It's been reprinted
Yeah.
in different fashions. Great Cocoa.
Same idea here, where
Yeah.
you have the names of the
And that,
farms
The different
and stuff.
hospitals and their location.
and actually, Jim's book was based on what Greg Coco put in the end. He said, I hope somebody picks this up and
Yeah.
runs with it.
Oh, very nice.
Yeah.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for sitting through this 7.5-hour episode of Addressing Gettysburg. I definitely had fun, though. I mean, I've been waiting to do this for years, and we got to have you. We're going to do a medical part 2 because we're not even close to done with this one.
It'd be fun. A lot of the things we can touch on are the prominent people injured here and their wounds and what we've learned about them.
Yeah.
And it isn't always the way the history book says.
Yeah. What we should do is maybe pick something like one subject or one example of someone that you have a lot of detail on and really get into it for a Patreon show. Like just really deep analysis of, I don't know.
We'd recommend Barksdale and Hancock and Pender.
Those would be good ones.
And
And Hood.
Yeah. Okay. Good.
Yeah.
Any one of those would be great.
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for listening. I hope you enjoyed this because if you didn't, you're going to be disappointed when we have them back on again. So other than that, thank you all for everything that you do, ladies and gentlemen, and we will talk to you next time. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank
Did you get what you wanted?
I had no idea what I wanted, and he gave me more than that. Need a Corps badge or other insignia for your uniform? Then check out The Badge Maker. Here's what some of his satisfied customers had to say. Miranda said, I ordered an identification disc from Joe and it's fantastic. He hand-stamped it exactly as I wanted. Greg said, my unit has purchased from him in the past quality badges and good service. And Jerry S. says, the Badge Maker is the go-to place for accurate replica Civil War badges. So go to CivilWarCorpsBadges.com and attach a message with your order saying you heard about him on Addressing Gettysburg.
Our hearts so stout have got us fame, for soon 'tis known from whence we came. Wherever we go, they dread the name of Gary Owen in glory. Instead of spa or drink down ale and pay the reckoning on the nail, no man for debt shall go to jail from Gary Owen in glory. Instead of spa or drink down ale and pay the reckoning on the nail, no man for debt shall go to jail from Gary Owen in glory.
Lovely. Lovely.